Lord of the Mysteries, A Time Traveler in the Fourth Age by author Kai Yunji. Chapter 415-433. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel. Get early access to video on Patreon. 415 The Old Man and the Little Charlatan. Tuesday, May 15th. Klein contacted Shah. Although it was at 160 Berkran Street, where there was nothing there and the servants hadn't had time to tidy up yet. He conveyed his desire to meet very earnestly through gray fog space. So what? Angel? Shah looked at the chubby, slightly chubby but shapely Dwayne Dantes and asked in confusion. Why are you calling me in such a hurry? Don't you go to work? Don't I go to work too? Blonde and blue-eyed Shah death gaze. Ahem, I wanted to ask you for help. Klein felt a little embarrassed. He knew he might have been a bit too hasty. Tell me, and I'll do what I can to help. Shah crossed his arms and spoke casually. Actually. Klein resisted the urge to complain, took a deep breath, and then began to speak. There's a secret about him. He's actually Klein Moretti. He faked his death due to an accident, but now he's struggling to reconnect with his family. Do you need me to hypnotize your brother and sister? Shah asked uncertainly. No, I meant to ask if you can hypnotize Beander in sequence 6 or sequence 5. Klein was drunk. How could he possibly do such a thing? What you up to? Shah sensed something was wrong when she heard that. Actually. Klein confessed that he was after Maynard Jr., and that he wanted to have a serious talk with his former colleague, but also wanted to prevent his former colleague from revealing that he was still alive. Am I hypnotizing myself? Why don't you confess to your sister? Shah was shocked. What kind of person is this? If you want to go back to your family, go find your sister. She doesn't quite trust me. Klein was a little shy and embarrassed. If he were telling the truth, he would certainly explain without any hesitation that his main processor is Joe Mingrui. When faced with Melissa's gaze, which seemed to be looking at a phantom of his brother, or some unknown thing that resembled his brother, Klein felt genuinely guilty and ashamed. He was, after all, a man with feelings, and he was bound by those feelings. Should he prove to Melissa, or swear that he is Klein? Klein couldn't do it. He didn't want to deceive her so blatantly. You should continue trying to win over your sister, instead of trying to mess with me here. I think the risk of taking action against an Evernight Church bishop is too high. Why don't you try a different approach, like entering her dream? In reality, she might not believe you, but in a dream, she can't possibly ignore you, can she? Shah offered a solution. Yes. Klein's eyes lit up. Although Melissa had a night amulet, stealing it first and then entering her dream wouldn't be difficult. More importantly, Melissa wouldn't suspect his identity in the dream, so he could give her hints in the dream that he was still alive. It is very unethical to guide people to modify their dreams. Then it would be best if she really is your sister. Shah's eyes held a hint of suspicion. That's my sister, of course. Klein was getting anxious. He was determined to defend his identity in front of outsiders. Very well, may the winds of heaven purify your wandering soul. Shah has left. He has to go back to work at St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein also goes to church to pray, which is part of his daily routine these days, mainly to build his public image. Then he happened to run into Leonard. Old man Zoroaster gave a slight look, making Leonard glance at Dwayne Dantes. Klein, who was still in a sensitive period, felt a pang in his heart, but he calmly walked to the donation box and put 50 pounds in. His movements were slow, just enough for Shah to catch. Shah, who had changed to a black hairstyle, smiled and nodded at the devout believers of the goddess. Leonard happened to see this scene. The old man on Leonard's body glanced at Shah and then looked away, his gaze still secretly observing Klein, as if he was confirming something. He was very careful and didn't even reveal any information to Leonard. My ham sandwich and coffee won't magically walk into the church, Mr. Leonard Mitchell. Shah looked at Leonard speechlessly. If you're going to bring food, hurry up and do it. What are you dawdling about? Cough. Leonard had no choice but to wait for the next opportunity. Shah was also helpless. Why was Klein still thinking about stealing things behind Channy's gate? He had already prepared to use his power as bishop to re-enter Klein's file so that he could continue to hold a nominal position in the church and receive a government salary. Once you rejoin the church, is it difficult to slowly rebuild your old network of relationships? You haven't given up on your theft plan yet, so who would dare to give you a job? Meanwhile, when Klein realized Leonard suspected him, he almost immediately thought of the parasite on Leonard's body and the thought of reporting him arose, but he was still worried about affecting Leonard's safety. Perhaps it's a coincidence. Klein comforted himself with this thought until the next day, when he returned to the church to give money again. This time, Leonard didn't pay too much attention to him. To be precise, after seeing him, he subconsciously looked away. That's way too obvious. I need to warn them. Klein first donated money, then walked over to Leonard, extended his left hand wearing a black glove, and greeted Leonard, saying, "You must be an expert at hide-and-seek." Klein felt that this was enough to hint at and warn the other party, since he had guessed parasite in the existence of Zoroaster. Ha, ha. Leonard chuckled awkwardly twice and reached out to touch Klein's hand. The palace Zoroast inside him was initially silent, then took control of Leonard's body and said in a very complicated tone, "Perhaps I should thank you. But what exactly do you want to do?" Grateful. Is he referring to Mobit Zoroaster? Has my Gehrman identity been exposed too? Klein was startled. He recalled Orange Light's words about a great being above the spirit world, and how some wanted to invest early, while others maliciously sought to seize shares. Maintaining a relaxed tone, he said, "Why do you always ask that? I've been doing the same thing all along." As Klein spoke, he pointed upwards with his finger, then gave a knowing laugh before turning and leaving. Grandpa Pales was left standing there lost in thought, while Leonard, who had regained control of his body, looked bewildered. "Old man, who is that?" "Your old friend. This is one of the immortal monsters that survived from the fourth epoch." Leonard felt that the frequent appearances of these old monsters from the fourth epoch at St. Samuel Cathedral were somewhat disrespectful to the goddess. However, Pales did not give any reply, seemingly still pondering Klein's words. Shah who was giving the sermon up there, couldn't bear to watch what was happening in the room. 416 Tomato Sauce Moon. Poor Palace Zoroast. There was nothing wrong with it, it was at least Marauder's last shred of conscience. But because of the incomplete state of mind, he couldn't tell the real deal from the fake, and was even fooled by Klein, a master conman who was used to deceiving people, and became suspicious and paranoid. Shah couldn't give Shu Dian a reminder. After all, it didn't matter for other accounts, but this identity as Counselor Maynard's youngest son was something he used to experience life. It was specially encrypted, so it seemed normal for Zoroaster, whose status was incomplete, to overlook the bishop's abnormalities. After all, recognizing the gray mist aura emanating from Klein was one aspect. The Evernight Church has a hanged man sequence, which is another matter. For normal people, at least the old man is more concerned with Dwayne Dantes, and for ordinary hanged men. It's understandable that Beander overlooked some aspects, since what was needed was the aura of the gray fog, not anything else. The three great families of mysteries caution lies in the fact that even after discovering some problems with Dwayne Dantes, they did not use any clones or other means to investigate or probe for a long time afterward, simply giving up after receiving a warning. This doesn't make any sense no matter how you look at it. We need to let 008 have some influence. Well, the full moon is almost here, I'd better focus on preparing for the moon mass in a few days. Shah withdrew his gaze and focused on his work. Exploring the truth of the world and finding something that brings peace to the heart are equally important. He did not think it was a sign of weakness. Information exchange is the underlying logic of the universe, and so is finding a job that isn't too terrible. Friday, May 13th. It was a full moon that day. The moon mass means that, in addition to the Evernight goddess reaping a wave of fervent faith, the priests of the Evernight Church also receive a substantial bonus. Although the offering box at St. Samuel Cathedral was right there, and although the priests of Evernight Church could easily contribute a substantial amount, everyone subconsciously overlooked this fact, except for Shah who put in 100. This pound is a reward for myself. Then, not long after, the money was returned. The priest in charge of the matter sternly warned Shah not to break the rules, and that even if she wanted to donate, it should be in another box. "Sir, I only donated 10 pounds. Shah was clearly in a dilemma, he didn't want to take more money from others. "Please don't doubt my 30 years of work experience, Mr. Maynard. Really, every year there are kids like you with a strange sense of mission." The old priest was helpless. He had seen too many people and things like this. Some said there was a lot of money involved, some said there was little. These little rascals weren't after money, they just wanted to make fun of this old man. "All right, father. As a token of my gratitude." Shah discreetly slipped something into the priest's arms. "You're here again, kid. Are you going to use your money to humiliate this old man again?" The old priest was somewhat annoyed. In his long career, he had seen many such wealthy little people who liked to throw money around. However, the texture felt a little off. He looked down and saw 2 small plastic packets of ketchup. In this era, such things probably existed. After all, if there was toilet paper, how could there not be similar plastic bags? Emperor Russell always seems to pay the price for the unreasonable things his descendants do. Cough cough. From the first moment I saw you, I knew you were a good butler. The old priest's expression softened, and no one understood how much the ketchup was a salvation for the people of Backland, especially on a night destined to be long and busy. 2 bags of ketchup were a true spiritual savior. You look great today, Maynard. Daly, still wearing a black robe, walked over, placed her hand on Shah-Ur's shoulder, and then licked her lips at him. Daly swore that if it were someone else, she would definitely be more mindful of her manners. After all, she's not the same Daly she used to be. But with Shah-Ur, Dunn would definitely understand. Well, she's just a naturally mischievous person who couldn't resist. How fortunate I am to meet such a witty lady in such a tedious job. Shah-Ur smiled, of course understanding what Daly meant, and handed over 2 more packets of ketchup. But by the time he came to his senses, he was surrounded by a group of priests whose clothes were black with red accents. These guys, instead of working properly, it's just 2 packets of ketchup. Shah-Ur quickly ran out of the ketchup he carried with him, but being a perfect person, he quickly devised some more ketchup to distribute. This was called food creation in Azeroth, and it wasn't too difficult. Shah-Ur even thought that Megos would open a ketchup production factory later. As the bishops, priests, and nuns left with satisfaction, Shah-Ur saw Mother, Mrs. Maynard, and Megos approaching him. He naturally handed out 2 packets, and only then did he feel a little ashamed. And this seemed to be a switch. Hazel smiled, took her mother's hand, walked over, took a few ketchup packets, and as she left, she squeezed Shah-Ur's white gloves, her smile looking cute and playful. Then, it gave the other people attending Mass a signal of error. Is this handsome man in bishop's robes handing out small gifts on behalf of Evernight Church, or is it ketchup that everyone uses? Is this a blessing from the goddess for tonight? Praise the goddess. Several girls walked over shyly and drew a scarlet moon on their chests. Shah-Ur maintained a polite smile, then took out more ketchup from her black canvas bag. He, the officiant of tonight's Mass and a leading figure at St. Samuel Cathedral, was thus forcibly confined to this place. The other priests responsible for guiding the believers in did not stop him, instead, they helped maintain order with great interest. Dwayne Dantes. Klein, still dazed, walked in with his servant, queued up in a daze, and took away 2 packets of tomato sauce. In his left pocket was the 300 pounds he had prepared to donate, and in his right pocket were the 2 packets of tomato sauce he had just received. Klein had no idea when Evernight Church had developed this tradition. He turned around and saw that his personal valet, Richardson, was also holding 2 packets of ketchup, which made him feel a little better. At least he had 4 packets now. This process lasted about 10 minutes. When Shah-Ur finally stood in front of the Black Knight emblem, 2 packets of ketchup were missing from his pocket. They had been stolen, but thankfully, the other party had only stolen what he had been fantasizing about. The crimson full moon rises, illuminating the earth. He started the chanting and led everyone in singing, at which point he lost the last 2 packets of ketchup he had on him. A hidden force, without touching the imaginary product, stole the last 2 packets of ketchup from him. 417 Situation in disorder. Evernight goddess. Ammonizes. Everyone sank into a sweet dream, dreaming of themselves, dreaming of their parents, wife, and children. This is forever, forever, forever. As the holy and rhythmic sounds echoed, the believers in the great prayer hall were naturally calmed down, seemingly forgetting the troubles of life and no longer worrying about the various problems of the real world. Aside from Shah-Ur, that demonic wolf was really going too far. That's what he kept for himself. That bastard woman. After the sermon ended, the pastors took out water and bread and distributed them to Klein and the others. This was a blessing from the night, food shared by the living and the dead. Klein, of course, wouldn't waste food. He hadn't had dinner yet, so he spread tomato sauce on the mediocre bread, drank some water from his glass, and watched the candles on the altar light up one by one. Against the backdrop of darkness, he enjoyed the tranquil, peaceful, and joyful feeling. The other believers who came to Mass also used the ketchup distributed by Evernight Church and felt that the church was incredibly thoughtful today. Even many of the older priests who had some free time felt that having 2 packets of ketchup was very appropriate in this special, quiet atmosphere and on this full moon. Seeing the students' outstanding performance on stage, Bishop Electra decided to include the distribution of tomato sauce in the regular agenda of future celebrations as part of Holy Communion, since nothing could better represent the gentle red moon than red tomato sauce. Shah-Ur was still leading the pastors and the entire choir in chanting in unison. We will look up at the night sky, tenderly saying the name, Evernight Goddess. Besides Evernight Goddess, there are no other words, may the goddess pluck them together with sweet silence in the intervals between the angels' songs. Goddess. If she could hear, she would surely answer, and show the dead a pure smile. Come, rest, sleep peacefully, my children. The ethereal voice gave the believers present a feeling of their souls being cleansed, as if they resonated with all the spirits present. Even Klein of Sequence 5 felt that he had been purified, and his spirituality flowed out naturally and gently. Then, a tranquil darkness seemed to appear before his eyes, a darkness without a sound. I seemed to hear a long, resonant shout, Ammonizes. But the sound was very ethereal and quickly faded away under the power of the hidden force. Klein's spirit gradually forgot the specifics of what he heard. He seemed to be walking in a land of moon and deep sleep grass, where corpses lay in the darkness, their faces pale but peaceful, as if they had not died but were just sleeping. I've seen some of these Klein products, and I haven't seen others. When he saw himself lying there, he felt no fear, but rather a sense of relief and peace. Klein had his eyes closed in relaxation, a smile on his lips as if he were in his mother's arms, and a tombstone stood beside him. It reads, "The best older brother, the best younger brother." The ethereal voice continued to echo, "Cross your hands, place them on your chest, make a silent prayer, and cry out from your heart, the only refuge is peace." As if relieved, Klein lowered his head, closed his eyes, raised his hands, crossed them in front of his chest, and silently repeated, "The only refuge is peace. Peace is the only true refuge. Kingdom of eternal darkness. Ammonizes. I'll give away Death God's uniqueness for free, but you can't take my last 2 packets of ketchup." This time, Shah-Ur was genuinely annoyed. He held a dark, ethereal, straight longsword in his hand and cleaved Evernight Goddess's stone table in 2. Even Evernight Goddess was thrown into a frenzy by this, revealing its fully formed 8-armed demonic wolf form. Some of its arms held the scarlet moon, some held a golden phoenix ornament, some held a heavy black scythe, and others held a phantom book with feathered serpent encircling its surface. But with a mere wave of his hand, the illusory book with feathered serpent surrounding its surface vanished from Evernight Goddess's hand, transforming into a slender feathered serpent scepter in his sleeve. With a swing of the scepter, it fell violently, causing the entire kingdom of eternal darkness to lose its color and turn pale. Moreover, amplified by the longsword in his hand, which was as misty, liquid, and solid as solid, the pale domain spread extremely quickly, and death hurriedly caught up. "Are you serious? Just for 2 packets of ketchup?" Without hesitation, Evernight Goddess swung the scythe of night forward, and the eyes of the bronze bird ornament lit up. A different kind of power, combined with secrecy, resisted the attraction that was like abyss, like hell. The real world. The prayers continued, one after another, as Shah-Ur stood on the altar, her expression one of deep concentration. Klein opened her eyes, raised her hand to rub the corners of her eyes, and tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. It was a rare moment of loss of composure and vulnerability for her. He slowly exhaled, still unable to control his tears. He glanced around and, by the light of the candlesticks, noticed that most of the believers had tear-streaked faces without realizing it. Even his personal valet, Richardson, had lost his composure and let the tears keep streaming down his face without wiping them away. The moon mass is more like a ritual involving the power of the Beander, whose purpose is to resonate with everyone's spirit. However, the effect of this ritual seems to be quite strong. He actually felt death was right beside him, and he also saw his deceased family members and himself. He saw the dead, Zhou Mingrui's father, Mother Peng, and other relatives. Even knowing he would never see them again wouldn't matter, as long as this event wasn't explicitly confirmed. But now he clearly saw their bodies, pale, cold, and expressionless. This really made Klein a bit vulnerable. Thankfully, their expressions were all peaceful, which was Klein's greatest comfort. This experience had allowed him to let go of the past a little. He wasn't surprised to see his past self, since this kind of mass couldn't possibly be mind-reading or actually going to the kingdom of Evernight Goddess to see the souls of his deceased relatives in heaven. It was more like a form of spiritual guidance. However, the effect was truly terrifying. Maynard Jr. grew up to at least Sequence 5, and most likely grazed a colleague. Klein made a joke of himself and then went to donate money. 418 The Power of the Night. Kingdom of Eternal Darkness. Evernight Goddess looked at Shah-Ur with some incomprehension. If he hadn't sent Mother of the Sky to retrieve the golden phoenix ornament from Azek Eggers, he probably would have made Shah-Ur ride on his back right now. How could this guy just take back Death God uniqueness like that? The darkness divine power he left on it during this time couldn't hold it back, and it was taken away directly. And what's that thing on his left hand? Why does it feel like the aura of the river of eternal darkness? Shah-Ur, however, didn't care. This time, Shu was in very good condition. As the embodiment of the end, Death's authority had never been complete since the fourth epoch. At least the end had always been separate from death. Now, when the end calls for uniqueness, it's a sure thing. He gripped the feathered serpent scepter, employing little drastic action, simply using his power to intimidate, his pale authority staining this dark realm of the gods, while simultaneously reflecting on this change. This power did indeed seem related to the river of eternal darkness, but how he had drawn it over remained a mystery. I just felt it, and then this happened. However, stopping now is impossible. Sha'ur exerted increasing pressure on Evernight Goddess. The eyes of the gold phoenix ornament in the other's hand seemed to brighten, but were quickly obscured again by a black, curtain-like mist. In this clash between silence and death, the first to succumb to the pressure and erupt with more vibrant colors became the fuse for all of this. Those 2 packets of ketchup. This fleeting red color awakened Sha'ur's rationality, pulling her out of the atmosphere that wanted to dominate and make everything fall into ruin. And the colorless, dead, tomato sauce, after the paleness faded, actually regained its vitality. Sha'ur dipped her finger in the mixture and tasted it. It didn't affect the flavor at all. I'm not playing anymore. Sha'ur stopped what he was doing, and the feathered serpent scepter in his hand became ethereal, transforming into a semi-transparent spirit that surrounded him. The things that had been destroyed in the divine kingdom began to recede as the color faded. He sat on a chair that resembled a tombstone, holding 2 slices of ordinary bread and a glass of water that he had taken from St. Samuel Cathedral, enjoying his dinner from back then with some ketchup. Ammonizes watched as Sha'ur suddenly stopped, but he still held the black scythe in his hand, his heart filled with vigilance. After all, in his view, everything that had happened today was too absurd. It was ridiculous that a war of gods had almost been triggered just because of 2 packets of ketchup. But Sha'ur enjoyed her dinner quietly and peacefully. On the contrary, Evernight Goddess seemed a bit awkward posing there. He was also slightly affected, and 2 more slices of bread disappeared from St. Samuel Cathedral in the real world. Demonic Wolf swallowed them in one gulp, while Sha'ur had not yet finished eating. He was still somewhat embarrassed, and during the few minutes of silence, the 8-armed demonic wolf put away his terrifying form and returned to his quiet human appearance. He took another piece of bread and ate it in small bites. This was not elegance, but simply a matter of reason prevailing and a slight tendency to synchronize his behavior. Putting aside the facts, are you not at fault for what happened? After Sha'ur drank the water in one gulp, he threw his first punch at Evernight Goddess. Hee. Evernight Goddess ate his bread, seemingly oblivious to Sha'ur's words. 6. God Almighty said that the sheep of the world sometimes stray, but the light always shines. He jumped down from the chair, or rather the tombstone, and went to Evernight Goddess, spreading large swaths of tomato sauce on her bread, at least 4 servings, worth. Ammonizes swore that she really wouldn't want to pay attention to it unless she absolutely had to. What is that? Evernight Goddess refers to something like the corruption of the river of eternal darkness. Ah, the gray fog. Sha'ur thought for a moment and then said. But you are now a spectator pathway. Although this isn't the first time Evernight Goddess has encountered this, he still has some doubts about Goddess when faced with this kind of unreasonable, cross-pathway connection to the source. It's not that hard to understand. I didn't understand it either just now, but after outputting it for a while, I understood it pretty much. 2. That's simulated using the power of gray fog space, but the simulation will connect with the original, so it's still quite frightening. Sha'ur also found it amazing. The gray fog could indeed meet any need that was preserved in the fog of history, and there was no need to worry about the simulation being fake. Although Saphira itself had anti-counterfeiting features, Saphira Castle was disguised too realistically, which would lead to a connection with Aben branch stream, and then, it became real. If I were to die, I'm afraid I would sink into the river of eternal darkness. Unless you jump into the chaos sea first. Seemingly feeling it wasn't precise enough, Sha'ur added another sentence, then, as if remembering something, shook his head. No, why would I do something so stupid? To create a simulated underworld environment somewhere in advance, a simulated life form the end, a simulated river of eternal darkness. After death, how wonderful it would be to sink into the riverbed you laid out. This is a plan that needs improvement, and Sha'ur hopes that Evernight Goddess can help with its consideration. After listening, Evernight Goddess looked at the bread with only a few bites left in his hand, lost his appetite, and a hidden force wiped the bread away, handing a black scythe to Sha'ur. I'm tired. Evernight Goddess scratched his head in rare frustration, feeling as if all his previous plans, preparations, and methods were like expired coupons, full of expectations but impossible to realize. This thing is pretty useless. Sha'ur casually grasped darkness, uniqueness. Evernight Goddess thought, I'm just giving up. But if uniqueness is so easy to separate, what's the point of the gods fighting? This thing is at most a superficial feature. Or if someone gets it, unless they are a hero who moves Evernight Goddess with love and faith in their own life, it will not have any effect. Although they can use it directly, it is still not very useful. At least, that's what Shah thought before he took control. Upon grasping it, invisible, illusory threads appeared before his eyes, the largest being several points of light, seemingly mythical beings of angelic level. With a mere thought, he could transform the vast number of believers in the darkness into his night herb and moon flower. Human vitality is truly tenacious. Shah whose heart was free of any evil thoughts, exclaimed. 419 Letting the wolf in. Shah has already passed the stage where hot water or molten aluminum that hasn't solidified would scald an ant nest. So, faced with so many massive faiths, he simply glanced at them, did some basic information gathering such as the male-to-female ratio, age ratio, and distribution statistics, and then focused his attention elsewhere, on the place that made both his and Evernight Goddess's spirits tremble at the same time. This spiritual authority is quite interesting. In an instant, Shah even saw the mysterious large door on the second floor of gray fog space above Spirit World, namely Saphira Castle. Not only Shah but even Evernight Goddess saw it. However, since they both came down from gray fog space, they did not experience any rejection reaction. The spiritual authority, in symbolism, is the destination of spirits and their master. As for the spirit itself, the blessing of the spirit is exaggerated. In the past, Shah only felt that this authority overlapped with the authority of Great Mother and Death. Looking at it now, this authority is actually too perfect for the needs of the spirit world's ruler. It's an important authority to increase the blue bar, no, to increase the red bar, to evolve innate talent and comprehension, to strengthen the life force, and to thicken the wall of destiny. I'll trade my death god uniqueness for one branch authority in your favor. Don't even think about it. Almost the instant Shah opened her mouth, Evernight Goddess refused outright. Shah scythe also disappeared, and when it reappeared, it had been taken away by Evernight Goddess. He even said he would exchange it for death god uniqueness, something that could be taken back at any time. How dare you bring it up again? Amonizes stopped giving up on herself. She instinctively moved to the side, crossed her arms to protect her chest, and adopted a defensive posture, watching Shah-Ur's unclean and shaky hands with great vigilance. It was just a casual test, and Amonizes didn't think anything of it. No matter how outrageous Shah-Ur was, he couldn't violate the basic rules. Given Shah-Ur's personality, he should have just played around with it, returned the power of the night to her, discovered that he was wasting his time on the Black Death War, and then returned the uniqueness of the Death God to her as well. This was originally intended as a strategic retreat, but now it could easily turn into inviting trouble. Believe me, really, give me the authority of your spirit and soul, and I will help you fight the God of combat. I will help you become eternal darkness, and from then on, we will be two ends of a scale that will never betray each other. Shah-Ur tried to take a step towards Amonizes. The demonic wolf woman in front of him, whose arms had been retracted, reappeared. Not only did she grow sharp teeth, but even her wolf ears stood up. She looked even more ferocious than when the two of them had fought. Can the two ends of a scale be level? Amonizes retreated slowly with a cold smile. That must be the case, equals, respectful and harmonious. When things are fine, I'll support you, and when things are in trouble, you'll let me step on you. Shah-Ur replied without hesitation. What a healthy symbiotic relationship this is, with neither party being a burden. If you don't say it, there's still a possibility. Amonizes understood Shah-Ur's meaning, of course. If she had the same conditions, she would certainly want to arrange things the same way. In their civilization's terms, this is called the relationship between a primordial being and a companion being, which in their culture would be equivalent to a lord and a knight. Then there's nothing to discuss. Shah-Ur sighed regretfully. Evernight Goddess remained indifferent. How could she do something that would give others a handle against her? The topic was put aside. Shah-Ur walked over, put his arm around Evernight Goddess's waist, and strolled casually in the deserted field. After walking a few steps, he let go of her because it was uncomfortable to hold her. After all, Evernight Goddess had so many arms on her body, it really was uncomfortable to hold her. I don't have such a deep desire for it. If we can get it, that would be the best. If we can't, it's okay, it won't make any fundamental changes. As Shah-Ur spoke, the illusory feathered serpent crawled from his body back onto Evernight Goddess, transforming once again into the motionless Book of Death in her hands. Evernight Goddess's refusal of his request was actually a good thing, because once Shah-Ur truly obtained the authority of the spirit, the more authority he collected related to the spirit, the closer he would naturally be to Saphira Castle, to Saphira, the one who supports the spirit world and symbolizes its ruler. The price to pay is that the three great families of mystery, from top to bottom, will face an even more serious resurgence of divine consciousness, or rather, the consciousness of the celestial venerable. It's unclear who will be the first to break down, but the upper echelons of the three great families of mystery are probably doing quite well right now. However, Klein will definitely be the first to suffer. This choice, to activate Saphira Castle so that the Beyonders of the Spectator pathway can better utilize its power, while the true Beyonders of the three great families of mystery suffer, is rather selfish and inhumane. How are you able to manipulate it so skillfully? For some reason, when Shah-Ur invoked the uniqueness of the Death God and Evernight Goddess, he didn't see that strong, even burdensome, negative effect that would be considered a burden to the true God. I hold a divine position in the underworld system of the Western continent, and it is an extremely prestigious and ancient divine position. The underworld of the North and South continents, though created by Phoenix progenitor, was subordinate to the spirit world, while I, as Lord of the spirit world, held sway over it. At that time, the underworld itself was also within my jurisdiction. The river of death, seeking to catch me, had too many things to bury. Shah-Ur mentioned the Western continent, and then, as if remembering something, he stopped and looked at Evernight Goddess. Evernight Goddess seemed to sense something as well, and his gaze towards Shah-Ur deepened. Do you want to be my personal disciple, my successor? Shah-Ur thought of the final plot of a certain circle of inevitability and suddenly felt a mischievous urge. A celestial being strokes your head, and you awaken your wisdom by tying your hair together. I can consider it. Evernight Goddess's tone revealed no emotional change. Even though she knew that Shah-Ur's words were somewhat wicked, Evernight Goddess was actually more practical than such abstract concepts. Shah-Ur's understanding of the death pathway and her control over the death authority far surpassing hers in these areas. Regardless of the method used, understanding the opponent's tactics is always the starting point for overtaking them. Of course, Evernight Goddess can study and comprehend it on her own at her own pace, since the uniqueness of the Death God is in her hands. However, her time is limited, perhaps 2 or 3 years. This is long enough for ordinary people, but for Evernight Goddess, it's really not enough time to do anything. You have to tell me first what the benefits are. Because there were no outsiders here, Evernight Goddess's words were very straightforward. She wasn't embarrassed at all. In fact, she didn't think that this guy, who had been throwing his weight around after taking 2 packets of his ketchup, was being kind by offering to help. 420, famous as Heavenly Sow. If you join my Howley lineage, you will enter my doorway. Door wall. Shah-Ur pondered what benefits he could offer Evernight Goddess. He did make it up on the spot. After all, it would be quite difficult to fool Evernight Goddess. You just see me as the other side of your scale. Evernight Goddess couldn't stand it anymore and made up a reason for Shah-Ur. Both of them knew that these were all just empty words, but Shah-Ur really wanted to give a proper reason. Those who are not of our kind will surely have different hearts. But you are female, so it's okay to leave behind improved genes. Shah-Ur stopped pretending. Helping Russell and helping Klein were the same thing, just traditional mindset. His words were quite impolite. If it were Rini Tinnikel, she might have been secretly annoyed, but Evernight Goddess remained calm. As a former executive in Northern Europe, she had a lot of information available online, including various ideas and concepts. According to Evernight Goddess's speculation, a person like Shah-Ur would rather awaken the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings and let the world fall than allow the gods of the North and South continents, or other outer deities, to rule the Western continent. The less he cares about the North and South continents, the more he values the Western continent. I'd rather destroy it than give it to an outsider. This sense of territory isn't unique to humans, animals have it too, so it's nothing unusual. Of course, I will only say such a rude thing once. I also think it's very disrespectful. He bowed slightly apologetically to Evernight Goddess. Those, well, radical thoughts only need to be said once, there's no need to bring them up repeatedly, that would look bad. That's really impolite. Evernight Goddess nodded, knowing that this was the harshest, most blunt thing Shah-Ur had ever said. How do you feel when you see the elves gradually adopting the style of the North Continent after so many generations? Evernight Goddess suddenly raised a question, and a smile appeared on her face. It's quite cute. However, Gothinum is still here, so elves are still elves, and most elves still maintain their traditions. Shah-Ur knew that what Evernight Goddess meant was that after so many generations of reproduction, coupled with living environment and other reasons, some elves now resemble the people of the North Continent in appearance. But this was normal. As long as Gothinum was still around, the core things could be passed down through characteristics and other means, so it didn't matter. This fusion is nothing compared to the original timeline, where people were like wandering ghosts, only able to move in the corners of civilization, regarded as outcasts or monsters, with all the high sequences perishing and the two later strangers with some connection to the land selectively ignored, living in a situation like the Forgotten Ones. That is what makes Sha'ur feel uncomfortable. I am civilization, and he is civilization. But I also want to see civilization develop naturally, under our care. It's strange, really. I love the elf race more than I love the Gothinum, even though the latter have helped me the most and are the closest to me. Gothinum is finished, and the elves are almost finished too. When we think about it, it's really hard for us to live. Sha'ur's lament made Evernight Goddess want to roll his eyes. Since the second epic, the elves had been ruling the north and south continents and the five seas, and had fallen for a glorious era. Before the ancient sun god could launch a major attack, and just as the Storm Church was about to take drastic measures, the elves rose up again with Hermit. It's only been a decadence, a little over 1,000 years, yet you've kept it in mind from the fourth epic until now, almost 4,000 years. When the ancient sun god ruled the world, the entire world had to bow down and dare not look up at the sun in the sky. It wasn't just you elves who did that. Evernight Goddess smiled politely and remained silent. She had chopped down demonic wolf's legs with a single sword strike, making it impossible for her to empathize with him. Sha'ur then took out the Scroll of the Gods. The lingering yin energy on it startled Evernight Goddess. Another item imbued with the aura of eternal darkness. How come there are so many? She looked over there. This is an Eastern-style landscape painting. If one is discerning enough to appreciate it, one can clearly see the dark, ghostly handprint on the scroll that resembles a seal. The painting contains mountains and water. The mountains are Yinshan, full of graves, and the water is stagnant and silent. The spirits lingered, and the air was thick with ghostly energy. There is no way to live, and no way to die. The enslavement controlled by this painting exists in a state between life and death, even worse than that of a secret puppet, who at least lacks spirit and resentment. You need to pay respects to the Patriarch, and then I will accept disciples on behalf of the Patriarch and pass on the teachings on behalf of the Patriarch. When it came to etiquette and law, Sha'ur carefully explained the details that could not be omitted. Who is the founder? Evernight Goddess didn't mince words, but couldn't help asking out of curiosity. The great emperor of Fengdu. The great god of Mount Tai. Of course, it's the river of eternal darkness itself. Sha'ur answered naturally. Evernight Goddess's eyelids twitched, and his expression unusually strained. Learning from nature and the universe, isn't that normal? Sha'ur looked at Evernight Goddess with a puzzled expression. Is there a problem? To join your Howley lineage, you need to establish connections with the river of eternal darkness. Evernight Goddess asked, recalling Sha'ur's previous performance. Yes, this is the foundation of the religion, and it can also be called ordination. Sha'ur briefly explained the process. First comes the ordination, establishing a fundamental connection with the river of eternal darkness itself. Only then does one gain celestial recognition, a divine position, and the authority to receive a share of the ancestral master's power, similar to how the Phoenix progenitor, in establishing the underworld, distributed some of the death's authority to Sequence 5. It's the same as Gatekeeper. The river of eternal darkness of the Western continent, or a tributary of the underworld of the North and South continents. Evernight Goddess continued to inquire. Of course it's the Western continent. Now that you've become my junior sister, your seniority will naturally rise. How could I possibly mistreat you? The tributary of the underworld in the North and South continents has not established a related divine system, mainly because apart from me, you have no connections there, and my connections are not very strong, sometimes effective and sometimes not. When Sha'ur spoke of the underworld, he also expressed some nostalgia for the deceased Salinger, the underworld emperor. Before his death, Sha'ur had spoken with Phoenix progenitor. Garagari and I have a good relationship. However, after Salinger's death, Sha'ur became more powerful than Jaragari in Aben branch stream, and his help to Jaragari was limited, and their relationship gradually became estranged. But the bond of kinship remains. Evernight Goddess is less suitable. If it establishes a connection with the river of eternal darkness, Salinger might cause indirect harassment. Of course, this isn't a big problem for Evernight Goddess, who holds secret authority, it's simply that the development of Aben branch stream is insufficient. It doesn't have much value in terms of receiving ordination, the input-output ratio is low, and the conversion efficiency is too low. Can I just study the law first? After much deliberation, Evernight Goddess still decided to trust Sha'ur and establish a potentially fateful connection with the river of eternal darkness, a continent whose details about the Western continent were unclear. He knew there were pitfalls, he didn't want to be betrayed and then end up counting the money for someone else. 421 Serving the Goddess. Trust between people. Would I use such despicable means to scheme against you? Sha'ur nodded understandingly. That was normal. The two of them were very good colleagues, both working for a struggling company on the verge of bankruptcy. It was perfectly normal for them to have some office romances or office politics. Anyway, in a stable and closed environment, where there is indeed room for advancement, but it's like walking on a dangerous building, such a relationship is perfectly normal. The two of them have been through thick and thin together, including crouching by the window, carrying guns together, and risking their lives together. It's reasonable that there's some trust between them. There's not much I can teach. Ultimately, the most crucial element is yourself, or rather, your spiritual affinity with Saphira. Since you haven't received ordination and haven't inherited the lineage, you'll always be lacking something. The patriarch doesn't have your place there, but you can use my name for now. Of course, when necessary. As Sha'ur spoke, he felt that he was not preaching the Dharma normally, but talking about something like the wedding dress divine skill. After all, if people worshipped him day and night under his name, whose merits would they be? Of course, it's not that mysterious here, and there's no such thing as merit or anything like that. At least not in the North and South continents. So Sha'ur readily imparted to Evernight Goddess the branches, lineages, and systems that he had previously gained through the inspiration of the Western continent's pathologists, which had grown from his seed. These messy rituals, cryptic texts, and gestures were all illusory. The core message can be summed up in one sentence: by imperial decree, may this law be obeyed immediately. A name is useful in the river of eternal darkness, and the whole system works. If you don't leave your name in the river of eternal darkness, then being purified by accident is considered entering the path, even if it's a side door, or left path. But who says it's impossible? Evernight Goddess lived from the 2nd epoch to the 5th epoch, and he possessed a wealth of occult knowledge. In his own interpretation, Sha'ur's door is similar to the gold phoenix jewelry in his hand, which is more directly derived from the phoenix progenitor. Garagari's mysterious artifacts are linked to a tributary of the river of eternal darkness. Sha'ur's door technique was a little more terrifying because the opponent no longer needed to rely on such items. They could elicit feedback and responses simply by using their name, and within a certain safe range. Evernight Goddess saw this clearly, but just couldn't learn it. You were one step ahead of us, more than 2,000 years ago. Evernight Goddess now understands why Hermit of the 4th epoch, during the War of the Four Emperors, would rather truly die than not try to cross the barrier between the two worlds. What he gained was probably this seemingly loose but also sticky connection with Saphira. Yes, the various details cannot be understood without a harmonious unity of heaven and man. The myriad flavors within are indescribable. Let me explain them to you in detail. Sha'ur embraced Evernight Goddess and walked to a secluded spot in the darkness. It wasn't to create an atmosphere, nor was the atmosphere that important, they were simply bored anyway, and since they were already there, they decided to go. Their relationship was just that ordinary. Evernight Goddess's slightly furrowed brows quickly relaxed. In the real world, Klein didn't believe that what he vaguely saw could be the true divine realm of Evernight Goddess. It was completely different from what he saw in God War ruins. The cold night sky and the mist shrouding the sea at the easternmost point of the Sonia Sea were so eerie. In the mist, the ancient, dark-roofed church is surrounded by crows circling overhead, offering their prayers and mourning. Around the church are ordinary houses, simple wooden huts, a gray mill, and shadowy figures. This atmosphere is quite different from that plain filled with deep sleeping flowers and night-blooming jasmine, which makes one feel as if they are in a dream. Even when donating money, Klein was still caught up in the shock and sadness of seeing her father and mother, as well as the slight sense of relief she had felt earlier, especially when she saw Bishop Maynard Jr. on the altar, his eyes closed, his expression seemingly calm, sad, and serene. Klein couldn't help but tap his chest 4 times clockwise to draw the scarlet moon, and then dropped all the large bills into it. After donating £300, the steps to leave still felt so heavy. Homesickness, like a gentle thread of spirit, stirred up the thoughts of a wanderer paying homage to his ancestors and remembering his relatives. Even though there is no culture of burning paper money here, this money, at least this time, absolutely cannot be spared. Klein took out his wallet, took out another £200, and put it into the offering box. Although he knew that his parents were definitely not resting in the kingdom of Evernight Goddess, he was not a traditional believer. Since faith was just a kind of spiritual satisfaction, he might as well think of it that way and attribute everything to Evernight Goddess. Does it hurt? No. Klein felt his heart had been purified, becoming incredibly clear. May the goddess protect you. The amount was indeed quite large, and even Bishop Electra took the initiative to come up to him. Although he was very happy that his student was able to concentrate on celebrating the Mass and wholeheartedly comprehend the will of the goddess, he still had to take care of such a big customer. Still too young, doesn't understand that serving a goddess shouldn't just be superficial. Bishop Electra shook his head slightly inwardly, feeling that Shah still had a lot to learn. May the goddess know that what I desire most now is to hear her teachings. Klein turned around, some information about the bishop flashed through his mind, and then smiled in response. This appears to be a more reliable and amiable bishop than Shah. Although Maynard Jr. Shah was more familiar with him, Klein preferred to be received by another bishop. Looking at Maynard Jr.'s Shah words, he always thought back to when they were both Beyonders at Evernight Church. Now, only a year or two later, the other was already a bishop at St. Samuel Cathedral, living the comfortable life he'd always dreamed of. It was painful. If you don't mind waiting a quarter of an hour, I can give you a sermon in the library. Bishop Electra glanced at his student and saw that the student still had his eyes closed, as if praying or contemplating something. He could only reluctantly accept the task. Honestly, the reason we had him preside over this moon mass was so that he could get to know these devout Backland believers better and strengthen their bond. As a result, the main task now still needs to be completed by the teacher. This student is still too naive. Social skills and interpersonal relationships are also very important. Interactions cannot just stay on the surface. It is necessary not only to receive people normally, but also to keep them and truly establish a certain connection. 422 Illegal intrusion. Everyone had a good dream that night. Besides, Klein, who discovered a thief breaking into his home due to his spiritual perception, was already considering whether to dismiss his personal servant, who only earned £35 a year, when his manservant was threatened by an organization like the East Barron Restoration Society. This is a crucial issue that requires a decision. Having already been awakened, Klein put on his coat and headed towards the communal bathroom, since it was just a side trip. Meanwhile, Leonard was still awake, investigating Sherlock Moriarty, even though the old man had told him that it was basically the same person, looking almost identical. He hadn't really paid much attention, except that the person had a beard and wore gold-rimmed glasses. However, the poet's three-dimensional composition ability clearly still has room for expansion into 4 dimensions, and this does not mean the end of the investigation. He first entered the dream of Mike Joseph, a reporter for the Daily Observer, and then entered the dream of Dr. Allen. Although Leonard was polite, he underestimated the insecurity of an unborn baby, especially since, a parasite and a tail swallower, two highly sensitive, easily stressed, and elusive individuals, are bound to trigger some subtle reactions when they unexpectedly come together. Well, he got lost as soon as he left Dr. Allen's dream. Not only that, he also had a nightmare within a nightmare, being chased and bitten by a bunch of worms with teeth. The owner of the house even poked his head out of the doorway, which was like a mouth, and asked him if he wanted to come in for a cup of tea. Because there was no death, the old man inside the body didn't care about this matter. Old man, what exactly happened to me just now? When Leonard woke up in a cold sweat, the old man remained silent, saying he didn't know. Leonard believed it. After all, if the old man were really that powerful, he wouldn't be hiding on him. But this is also an opportunity. After all, the power of misfortune shrouded the believers in the darkness, and they were the vessel for a relatively important being. So in Kingdom of Eternal Darkness, Evernight Goddess, who is obsessed with making rice cakes, raises his arm, and then, as if being plucked from a corn cob, it is plucked off one by one. It's just an 8-legged demonic wolf. It's not like he can't transform into Shah-Ur, who is unlocked in the full Pokédex. He can also transform into an 8-armed, 12-winged immortal demonic wolf bird. Sharing the power of the night occasionally is beneficial for both parties. And so, why don't you come in, have a seat, and have a cup of tea? The invitation was so sincere that Shah-Ur could not refuse this kindness. So he visited politely, and for a moment, even the color of his perfume seemed to become much more vibrant. After discovering the intruders in his luxurious single room, Will Osepton wanted to drive them away immediately, but he was still a tiny embryo dependent on the umbilical cord, and would lose his life if he lost the umbilical cord. He was powerless against the evil forces that had already passed their developmental stage and were still forcibly breaking into the baby's nest. You shouldn't, at least you can't do this. Will Osepton's accusation was sorrowful, or rather tragic. When he discovered that this tiny creature in front of him could actually steal nutrients from its mother, he felt utterly bewildered and desperately hoped that this unruly fellow could at least uphold some code of honor. At least we resolve any conflicts in our dreams. Will Osepton was sweating profusely. This was the darkest and most difficult moment of his life. At such a time, a baby holding a piece of black bread could kill him in his swaddling clothes through a blood-stained sack. According to Snake of Fate Beander, the unspoken rule of Pathway is that no matter how many resurrection plans you prepare in advance, as long as your body is still being nurtured by an ordinary human body, then the status and strength of sequence 1 are all empty, and even the Beander characteristic may not be contained. At this time, your spirit is probably half like an infant and half like a living sealed artifact. This may be the best time for mortals to hunt down gods, requiring only a little bit of good luck. As you wish. This courtesy was for Dr. Allen. In Shah-Ur's eyes, Will Osepton was still somewhat immature. After all, he rarely lived to be mature. The black vortex swallowed up the starlight clusters that represented dreams. Shah-Ur looked at the enormous snake of fate in front of him, then lowered his head and changed his eyes to a pair of colored contact lenses. A colossal armored warrior, wielding the 10 Perfection sword, thrust it towards Snake of Fate. Wait a minute, why did you start attacking right away? Before Will Osepton could even do anything, most of the good luck he had accumulated had vanished. Shah-Ur's Susano, in the dream, was affected by Parkinson's disease due to issues of realism and structure. Luck, you say? For a moment, Shah-Ur couldn't think of anything he had that he could use to gamble. Is the Celestial Venerable's curtain qualified? Shah-Ur immediately pressed down the Celestial Venerable's curtain, and Snake of Fate, which had originally prepared to resist, completely collapsed. After the opponent put down enough collateral to be equivalent to a sequence 1, it became difficult for Snake of Fate to influence the future by manipulating fortune. Good luck brings good things, and bad luck brings bad things. These are the simplest game rules, but now Shah-Ur has added a haphazard set of gambling rules. At the gambling table, no matter how lucky you are, you should let the other party deal the cards first, right? The process of increasing complexity has indirectly reduced the threat posed by Snake of Fate. Will Osepton was desperate. He didn't want to gamble at all, but he had no choice. He couldn't overturn the table. His opponent's river of fate was even more substantial than his. The little river could only follow the rules of the game chosen by the great river, driven by the great river. I was wrong. I'm still a child. The exaggerated mercury serpent shrank into a still rolling caterpillar, or silkworm, and the intermittent cries of an infant could be heard, as if trying to awaken someone's last vestiges of conscience. Once you're at the gambling table, you can't leave without betting something. Shah-Ur showed no sympathy for the other party. Although minors are prohibited from gambling, that is a law protecting human children, not an animal protection law. The uniqueness of fate. Didn't I seal it away? Moreover, it's a complete seal encompassing the spirit world, the astral world, the real world, and the river of fate. Will Osepton couldn't understand why the sealed uniqueness could project its power and facilitate this semi-forced gamble. I'm betting on luck. Through a revelation of fate, Will Osepton realized that he had to take a gamble to break the deadlock, so he gritted his teeth and chose to take a risk on an area that Archangel didn't care about. Guess big or small. Place your bet and you're done. Shah-Ur took out a paper cup, placed the projection of uniqueness of fate inside, and shook it. Greater than 423. The unspeakable secret. I'm not an adult yet, no. I wasn't even born. Is there anyone going to do something about this guy? No one knows Will Osepton's despair, but the crisis it faces at this moment is very real. If things go wrong, this embryo may have to be remade. Even Snake of Fate cannot reincarnate, and reincarnate again. At least give it a chance to catch its breath and let its skills cool down. Wait a minute. I'll make a prediction, Will Osepton said with a pained expression, as if no one cared about him. Shah-Ur's dice were rolling extremely fast. In the past, when faced with this kind of game, Will Osepton would not have hesitated at all. He would have guessed with his eyes closed, and fate would have been on his side. But right now, his previous 2 moves, first Leonard, then Shah-Ur, had already used up too much of his good fortune. Leonard himself wasn't much, but dealing with the old man required a lot more effort. He hadn't even managed to summon the tower cards, which floated up and intertwined in the air to form a circle. 3 decks were drawn, and Will Osepton stared in utter confusion, unsure which card to choose. His premonition of fate wasn't so accurate, it was as if he were facing the uniqueness of fate. Although this really is a projection of uniqueness. Shah-Ur snapped his fingers, and a virtual clock appeared, starting a 30-second countdown. This game has an adjudicator, they won't let you drag it out indefinitely. No matter which option I choose, the result is always a loss, right? Will Osepton raised his small face in despair. At this moment, he hated his intuition. This feeling of being unable to escape no matter which direction he chose, and being left behind to wait to be digested by the other party, was terrible. Uncertain. It depends on the choice you make. Shah-Ur raised his head slightly. He didn't believe Will Osepton didn't understand. Every sequence 2 of the Path of Fate knew that the result of struggling might be unknown failure, but once one believed in the failure predetermined by fate and gave up resistance, then failure was inevitably the future. I know, but I really don't know how I can win. Will Ossepton stared at the final 5 seconds of the countdown, closed his eyes, and blindly guessed one. Both were possible. The feeling of two ideas fighting in his mind was truly agonizing. I'll bet big. He said this as if he were very tired, and the snake lay limp on the ground, seemingly resigned to its fate. Shah nodded, picked up the paper cup, and the dice inside spun slowly, eventually resulting in a small number. This is not fair. Will Ossepton was furious. Even if they really wanted to gamble, they should have stopped at the same time he opened his mouth. Your fate is already in someone's grasp, and you still want to peek into the so-called future. Shah ignored Will Ossepton's struggles. The projection of the dice of probability, or rather the dice of destiny, in front of him transformed into a small snake of fate. It swam to Will Ossepton's side and bit the air. Will let out a cry of pain, and even his eyes dimmed a little. Dr. Allen's child will have to live a life devoid of money. The tiny snake of fate returned, circled around Shah, and after the two finished dividing the spoils, the projection of uniqueness of fate slowly disappeared. Will Ossepton has no problem with the seal of uniqueness of fate. However, the internal and external connections are undeniable. Even without the terrifying power of door pathway, it wouldn't be difficult for Shah to set up a network signal and graft some uniqueness power. Could Will Ossepton possibly block the power of uniqueness of fate from the past, present, and future? Shah draped the celestial venerable's curtain back over himself. Now that the bet was over and the loser had paid the price, he could certainly get the collateral back. On the bright side, at least I was able to be born safely. Although it was terrible, extremely terrible, as his fortune was stripped away, one of the most important aspects of a mythical creature's luck, it also meant that the IOU the other party took was signed by Dr. Allen's son. If Dr. Allen didn't have a son, then the so-called IOU would naturally not exist. So he'll still be alive, this old man won't kill him. But the problem is, fortune is a complicated thing. It's not just money that counts as fortune. Opportunities, Beander characteristics, mystical items, and even uniqueness are all part of the influence of fortune. He just had that part of his luck taken away by the uniqueness of fate. This means that he no longer has the opportunity to accommodate the uniqueness of fate. He has been directly kicked out, or rather, kicked out by the uniqueness of fate. He will no longer have the opportunity to complete the ritual of becoming a god. At least Dr. Allen's son didn't have that. He would have to be reincarnated again to find a way to make up for the loss in his destiny. But it's almost ready to be born. How could it possibly be reborn at this point? Monster, although pathway is magical and has strong stealth capabilities, fate has weight, and he cannot act recklessly. It's good to be alive. After seeing Shah leave, Will Ossepton composed himself and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. In any case, he had at least survived, and it seemed that the other party didn't intend to kill him. This might also be related to his friendship with the Nighthawks. Is this the huge rebate I received from investing in Klein Moretti? Will Ossepton was starting to have doubts about life. He had clearly felt a connection to fate with Klein Moretti, which was why he had helped him so much. How come now, instead of seeing any further opportunities, his early investment had turned into a life-threatening situation? 160 Oberklund Street, inside the residence of Dwayne Dantes. Klein is learning etiquette and dancing from Ms. Vahana Hasan. The woman was not in a good mood. I feel like I'll lose my job in a few days. She maintained basic social etiquette while speaking, however, you are still a bit reserved. Although you don't need to be like the Intis men, always sticking close to the ladies, you don't need to always keep a certain distance either. Occasional contact is normal. You seem too stiff and rigid right now. Klein was taken aback by what he heard, but still moved a little closer, though not too close. Like the original Shah, he was tempered by the vicissitudes of life in a special environment, becoming as pure as a wild chrysanthemum. I'm afraid of being impolite. Klein gave a similar answer to Shah back then. Does this mean that getting too close to a lady is impolite? Or does it also imply that I am very charming and that getting too close would embarrass her? Ms. Vahana Hasan felt a little better and smiled at the wealthy and gentlemanly man in front of her. She felt a little sorry for him. After all, well, if getting a little closer would be impolite, it might mean that he had some unspeakable difficulties. Greater than 424 Flora Jacob. Vahana is a very kind and mature woman. When she sensed that Mr. Dwayne Dantes might have some concerns that he couldn't say outright, she tried to close the social distance and offered some comfort to this gentleman with whom she got along quite well. Madam, is there any trouble you're in? Returning the favor, Klein, sensing the other party's goodwill, promptly inquired about it. Well, it's not a big problem. My husband is a businessman, and he recently had a minor conflict with someone. Vahana briefly touched on it without going into details, but then continued to instruct Klein, your question was a bit too direct. In formal social situations, before a real friendship has been established, try not to ask someone what happened to them unless they have made it very obvious. Haven't we established a friendship yet? Klein felt that building connections was quite difficult for him as a newly rich businessman. However, the woman later shared some information with Klein, such as the characteristics and preferences of the surrounding neighbors. This is quite important, since Klein is planning to experience the social landscape of this era as an ordinary Beander. After Vahana left, he thought for a moment and instructed the butler, find out what difficulties Ms. Vahana is facing, perhaps she will need our help. This may be the first step towards entering the world. After becoming wealthy, kind people tend to become generous. Before long, the experienced butler found out the reason. He reported this to Klein, who had just returned from St. Samuel Cathedral. He learned that the bishop who greeted him at the church this time was different, and it was no longer Shah-ur. Shah-ur was tired of the guy who came every day, and he preferred to entertain some young girls. Then they distribute some loose items from within the church's welfare or lucky bags. Since it wasn't food, but just some small trinkets that Shah-ur would likely discard once he got home, he could only use them to amuse the children. Boys rarely come to church, they usually come on Saturdays or weekends when they prefer to rest at home. Walter's housekeeper reported to his employer, Ms. Vahana, about the problems her husband, a fabric merchant, had encountered. He had invested £1,000 and had run off with the money, a classic case of absconding with the funds. He was currently asking Counselor Matched and Mrs. Liana to urge the police system to help with the matter. Walter himself wasn't very optimistic, not because he looked down on the West Velas field, but because no one could guarantee anything in this situation. The only thing Klein can do is offer a £200 reward to whoever helps solve the problem. This is his first step in making a name for himself on this street. He wants to take it one step at a time, steadily and surely, to re-enter the Evernight Church circle and get to know his old friend Maynard Jr. in a completely new way. Walter, the butler, was also an exception, his annual salary was only that much. This employer was truly a generous and warm-hearted gentleman. That's all there is to it. Hazel sat on the edge of the bed, fiddling with her skirt, and proudly told Shah-ur how she had earned extra pocket money. £200. Seemingly feeling that Shah-ur's reaction was not enough, she gently swung her fist again. Ms. Vahana should thank you for your kindness. But it's a bit much for you to compete with the bounty hunter for a job. He rarely gets a chance to make a big splash. Shah-ur reached out and ruffled Hazel's long, wavy hair, laughing. He felt the police at Westville were being wronged. Cloth worth over £1,000 wasn't so easy to hide. They should at least have been given some time to investigate. The presence of Beander made the Door Police Department seem rather incompetent. Shah-ur lived on West Velas Street and had heard plenty of complaints from the high-ranking police superintendents at West Velas. What you should do now is praise me. Not getting the feedback she wanted, Hazel abandoned Lowen's ladylike reserve and looked at Shah-ur with dissatisfaction. I remember you used to be a shy and timid girl. Shah-ur held Hazel's hand, but the other woman wasn't shy, she just smiled. I'm much more mature now, am I more attractive? Hazel confidently tossed her hair, only in her room could she be so ostentatious and vain. The girl learned about Ms. Vahana's predicament through a conversation between her parents, Counselor Matched and Mrs. Liana. As a girl with extraordinary abilities who was also subject to official supervision, she naturally did not miss the opportunity to demonstrate her abilities. She became a hero, solved the case, and even managed to snag a bounty for free. Does our Jacob family have any amazing genes? Shah-ur believes that Hazel's transformation is definitely related to her teacher, Flora Jacob. This is a very arrogant and unrestrained junior. As a parasite, he even instigated and controlled Hazel to pounce on him. However, he still has some rationality and bottom line. He only enjoyed the thrill of flirting with the bishop of Evernight Church in person. As an official professional, he did not really intend to do anything to Shah-ur and Hazel. Otherwise, Flora Jacob would have already been sent back for a complete overhaul. Hazel's adoration for this teacher, you can tell from how she now sees herself as mature, intelligent, powerful, and sexy. Reject the aesthetic of youthfulness and advocate maternal health. Shah-ur didn't try to coax the currently immature Hazel into cosplaying, he thought it would be better for her to focus on her grammar studies. Hazel felt as if she had been shot with an arrow, especially the faint chuckles of Flora in her ear, which made her furious and humiliated. This humiliation cannot be erased, it can only be transferred. Do you like someone like Mother? Hazel launched an attack on Shah-ur. I like someone like Mrs. Catherine. Shah-ur stepped outside the attack of the question itself and provided an answer. Hazel was shocked. No matter how charming Mrs. Catherine was, she was still close to 50. Compared to Audrey Hall, she didn't think she was inferior in any way. So what if she didn't have as many or as good pieces of jewelry? Her teacher was a demigod, a descendant of an angelic family. While Audrey was stronger than Audrey in the real world, she was far inferior in terms of connections in the mystical world. Get down, let me play. Flora quickly took over Hazel's body. She closed one eye, put her hands behind her back, glanced at Shah-Ur, and said leisurely, "Don't think I don't know what you like. Isn't it just big waves, long legs, and a noble title? She's a countess, so can I. In a few years, I'll marry an earl, and who needs a few more pearl necklaces? If you have any particular regrets about Mrs. Hall, I'll go and make contact with Hibbert Hall, and steal his heart." When Hazel smiles, her smile is confident and radiant. This Hazel Flora is a little too confident. This may be why Shah-Ur has never truly come into contact with the angelic families, who have not yet declined. At least, the people he has encountered, whether it's the Abraham family, the Sauron family, or Prince Lowen, are all relatively reserved, regardless of their status. This kind of proud, superior, and somewhat provocative attitude. It seems like, we haven't really had much contact before. After all, there aren't many people whose status is equal to his. If we further specify the gender, then there are even fewer possibilities. This Flora Jacob is clearly not worried about him discovering her existence. She's just betting that he can't deal with her, and that he can't possibly deal with Hazel either. The descendants of the Jacob family, do you really think the Evernight Church won't deal with you? Hazel, if your mother heard your joke, she would probably be very pleased with how much you've grown. But that's for later. What's most important for a young girl is her innocence, shyness, and vitality. Shah-Ur was about to lecture him when he saw the other person reveal a shy, flustered, annoyed, and somewhat smug look in their eyes, which seemed to have a touch of innocent desire. Depend on. For some reason, seeing Hazel like this made 1,000 alpacas run through his mind. He really wanted to suggest to Flora that, if she had the time, she could try parasitizing Audrey and let the girl see, well, how the so-called, true extraordinary nobles act, cold-blooded, ruthless, devouring weak branches to replenish strong ones, and so on. If she saw enough of that, she stopped being radical. I'll just pretend I didn't see it. Shah-Ur closed his eyes, abandoning his plan to recommend his own descendants, and decided to pretend he hadn't seen anything. He. Flora Jacob smiled with satisfaction, feeling it was a great success of her wit and charm, and then returned her body to Hazel. The Jacob family is in a precarious situation, as their glory days are over, but they're not exactly unfortunate either. Taking a step back, the Hermit of Fate will offer his loyalty to Hidden Sage. Take a step to the left and try to make a living in the Secret Order. After all, Zerathul's condition is unknown. The strongest members of the Secret Order are some demigods who prefer to hide and are unwilling to easily get into conflicts with others. The Jacob family has been parasitizing the Secret Order for 200 years, and has been parasitizing Intis through the Secret Order. Take a step to the right, and in the Fasak Empire, serve the Einhorn family, providing them with tasks suitable for Marauder, such as intelligence gathering, assassination, and reconnaissance. The Einhorn family still gives the Jacob family some trust, making it a semi-official outsourcing arrangement. In small countries like Lindbergh, and even large countries like the Thanapotter Kingdom, as long as they don't cause trouble and become parasitic, they won't be suppressed by official forces. Even if they are discovered, they can simply move to another place to continue parasitizing without any impact. As for the Kingdom of Lowen, this is the City of Miracles, Backland. What secret organization doesn't have a base here? Flora knows that the archbishops of the 3 major churches here are only at the saint level. If a parasite like her wanted to run away, it would be a piece of cake. She wouldn't be afraid of Shah-Ur at all. The gamble was that he wouldn't investigate further. Although it was risky, thieves love a thrill. At worst, they could jump into the sewers, where a small Jacob family hideout was located. They could simply use the setup inside to teleport away. But the Hazel family would be in much bigger trouble. It's all about confidence. So what if you see something wrong with me? Go ahead and report me. I am your sister's most respected and admired teacher. Parasite, which can create clones, has nothing to fear. Upstairs, Shah-Ur and Hazel stared at each other, and Hazel's face was actually very red because she also felt that her teacher's behavior just now was too bold, second only to the time when he pushed Shah-Ur down, but she just stubbornly endured it. She felt this was an important step towards becoming a mature and elegant woman, a crucial step in her self-cultivation. She needed to learn from her teacher and develop a confident and in-control mindset. Downstairs, at Counselor Matched's house, Vahana, who had come to teach the other party's daughter etiquette, first thanked Mrs. Liana for her help. Although Hazel obtained the bounty by using other people's identities, Lady Vahana still learned that she had provided important assistance. Because of her demigod teacher, Hazel became much more confident and dared to leave some of her own personal traces. Liana, with her dark green hair, said a few modest words and didn't discuss the topic further. They were aware of the Beyonders and suspected that their daughter had become one, but because Shah was there, they weren't too worried. However, there was no need to let others have this speculation. Liana then asked, Vahana, I heard you're still serving as Mr. Dwayne Dante's etiquette instructor. I wonder what kind of person he is. You just need to steer the conversation in a certain direction. Vahana considered for a moment and said, a true gentleman is warm-hearted, generous, kind, well-mannered, and knowledgeable. He is very charming, and not just in a masculine way. Seemingly feeling that such a description could easily convey some bad signals, coupled with some impolite speculation about Dwayne Dante's, she finally added a sentence. Mr. Dwayne Dante's is a very nice person. Oh, Liana understood. Vahana must have said that to imply that there was no romantic relationship between them. This is mainly a form of assistance based on considerations such as personal relationships, interests, and reputation. The other party handled things very well and should be a good neighbor. As for other things, Liana didn't think much about it. She was quite satisfied with Shah, and Hazel was still young after all. It wasn't appropriate to talk to her about this issue at this time. In case she rebelled, it would be troublesome. Yes, I plan to invite him to the dance this weekend. This opportunity was earned through the neighbor's approval and the gentleman's generosity. Saturday night, 8 p.m. Klein arrived at Counselor Matched's house at 39 Berklund Street in 2.5 minutes in his own luxury carriage. He glanced at the fountain pool reflecting the lights with its splashing water, then stepped down from the carriage while buttoning his tailcoat and walked slowly toward the main door of the house. Upon entering the great door, Klein immediately spotted Counselor Matched and his wife, Lady Liana, who came to greet him. And there's Maynard Jr., which is everywhere. Moreover, the other party is siding with Counselor Matched's family, which seems rather complicated. They look exactly like family members. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. Klein took the bottle of Nimble Red from his personal valet Richardson and handed it to Counselor Matched. He glanced at Maynard Jr. and said, very well, now I have a chance to get to know you again. Greater than 426 understanding each other. Your eyes look like you want to use me to steal something behind Charn's gate. Shah didn't think Klein was being particularly kind to him. Wait a minute, he fed Klein's sister. Was this guy trying to get revenge by feeding Hazel? It's best if not, because Jacob on Hazel is a man-eater, especially since Klein is capable of acquiring the Go family's Sequence 5 for collection. Klein quickly scanned the group as well. Counselor Matched was wearing an olive green army officer's uniform with several medals on his chest, which was in line with Lowen's social customs. Ms. Liana was wearing a yellow, collarless long dress, which, as a married woman, generously showed off her neck and half of her shoulder. Maynard Jr. Why does this guy always wear the Evernight Church's priestly robes? Against the backdrop of darkness, adorned with a deep red robe, and with a holy emblem resembling stars surrounding the moon, paired with a face as serene as the night, he was a force to be reckoned with in this setting, especially since everyone else was dressed in brightly colored formal attire while he alone wore a clergyman's robe. What's most heartbreaking is that although Klein was once a Nighthawk, he never wore clerical attire. Tigan City, the Nighthawks have never been issued uniforms, they are guardians, wretches, and scavengers. I look forward to seeing you here, Mr. Dwayne Dante's. Shah's greeting was quite ordinary, but Klein heard it and felt like, you're so pretentious. He'd seen what kind of person Maynard Jr. was before, and now he was putting on such an approachable act. It really did have the air of a clergyman, a local bishop. Those with connections get promoted really fast. Also, this is Mahert's house. The social etiquette I learned is that the male host should make small talk first, and then greet the female host. I haven't even given her the gift I brought yet. I'm sorry you had to see this, Mr. Dante's. Counselor Matched didn't seem to mind. He accepted Klein's gift and then handed it to his personal valet. Our little teacher can be a bit childish sometimes. Mrs. Liana gently took Shah's arm and whispered to him, emphasizing the importance of etiquette and manners. Etiquette is in the heart, not in the form. If it were a gentleman I didn't know, I would quietly agree with him. Mr. Dante's is different. Although he has only been in Backland for a short time, I feel a sense of familiarity with him. Perhaps it is the guidance of the goddess. Sometimes I can't help but suspect that he is even more devout than I am. Sha'ur smoothed over any rudeness with his exceptional friendliness, while Hazel glanced at Klein. The girl thought that Sha'ur must be someone special to take the initiative to greet him, but he just looked like a slightly overweight, older man. Well, at most, he can be considered wealthy, and he's quite generous with his money. Hazel added in his mind. What about etiquette? What about the procedure? Should we greet them first, then give a hand kiss, and then put the item inside? Klein felt that all the aristocratic etiquette he had painstakingly learned had been fed to Paige. Fortunately, Hazel thoughtfully helped to cover for Klein, leading him into the main banquet hall. To paraphrase Miss Justice, Hazel had a great sense of ownership. After Klein went inside, Sha'ur was greeted by Migos and Melissa, who arrived together. Both ladies were wearing rather ordinary blue dresses, and the Mahert couple, who were clearly already familiar with them, gave them a warm welcome. Migos was very calm, clearly used to such social occasions. Melissa, though somewhat uncomfortable, still responded politely. She didn't actually want to come to this couple who had been nice to her, but she couldn't refuse Hazel's invitation, especially with Migos accompanying her. I personally inspected the food served at the dinner. You two can look forward to it. Sha'ur brought up the two issues that girls care about most, food. As for dancing, neither of them was very interested. When Klein saw Melissa, his feelings were somewhat complicated. The good news is that her sister has become friends with Counselor Matched's daughter. The bad news is that this was probably introduced by Counselor Maynard's youngest son. Klein himself isn't afraid of this treacherous and shadowy social circle, but he really doesn't want Melissa to come into contact with it. Thank you all for attending this ball. First of all, let us praise the beauty goddess, the source of all goodness. Counselor Matched raised his glass to start the ceremony on the second floor. Praise the stability of the kingdom. Mrs. Liana continued. Praise the goddess's love and care. Sha'ur held the wine glass with 2 fingers, swirling the wine in a scarlet moon shape as if showing off her skills. Not a drop was spilled. Praise, all good deeds and justice. Hazel, recalling his own heroic deeds, also raised his glass. All the guests responded enthusiastically. They also knew one thing. Since Counselor Matched had invited Sha'ur and Hazel to the stage at this private gathering, it meant that the Mahert and Maynard families were indeed interested in a marriage alliance. Klein could also see this, which made him feel a sense of disconnect for a moment. After all, he had never thought about this kind of thing, but all the acquaintances of his generation he knew had finished their blind dates and started the preparatory process, which made him feel rather desolate. Immediately afterwards, Counselor Matched took Mrs. Liana's hand and led her down to the lobby on the first floor, where they danced the opening dance to a soft melody. Sha'ur followed closely behind, holding Hazel's hand. Facing the somewhat shy but determined girl who insisted on looking up at him, he bowed slightly and gave a respectful greeting. Hazel's surprise almost overflowed from her eyes. She lifted her skirt and returned the gesture with a slight bow, her eyes revealing a hint of excitement and secret joy. This was indeed a pleasant surprise, and it was a natural thing for Sha'ur to do, so she did not refuse. He couldn't find a clear reason to refuse, and the identity of Maynard Jr. was also a good fit for Hazel. If it's suitable, then accept it. It was just a fleeting romance, a chance to enjoy genuine human affection. As for Audrey, let's wait until he wants to cheat. As for Furs, the other person definitely doesn't want to get married, and is too lazy to marry. It would be easy to fatten her up. Many people witnessed this scene in the audience. The most envious one was Migos. She had every reason to be dissatisfied in any way, but she also felt a little happy for Sha'ur and Hazel. She wrapped her arms around Melissa's waist, wanting to relieve her emotions by dancing. Although Migos felt she was the first to arrive, and now could only watch Sha'ur and Hazel express their feelings for each other, she wasn't too disappointed or afraid. After all, the Maynard family had given her a lifetime employment contract, and she was a member of the Maynard family, which wouldn't change. Greater than 427. This is reasonable. Even in this ancient era, a lifetime contract was somewhat extravagant. Strictly speaking, Migos' contract with Sha'ur is for 30 years, which is not much different from a lifetime contract. After 30 years, normally there won't be another 30 years. The total annual salary, including bonuses, is approximately £4,000. That translates to an annual salary of approximately 1 million. This figure is quite exaggerated, because Sha'ur's own annual salary is somewhat far from this number, or rather, barely reaches this standard, and he is already the Bishop of Sequence 5 in Evernight Church, yet his annual salary is not even tens of thousands of pounds. Sha'ur had inquired about this with his teacher, who said that there had been a huge change in the salaries of church clergy before and after the Reformation, and that the church was very wealthy before the Reformation. At that time, the Orthodox Church was essentially a military-run business. After religious reformation, or rather, after 1,000 years of accumulated resentment from the lower classes, it sparked a humanist movement under the tacit influence of various royal families. The popes, who were of angelic rank, frowned deeply. This would not do. They could not allow a little money to affect the Church's millennium-long plan, the goddess, or the physical and mental health of our Lord. So they passed on the pressure to the lower levels. The archbishops, who were saints and demigods, discussed the matter. It was common knowledge that no demigod was poor, and at their level, money was no longer that important. In addition, the situation below was indeed quite outrageous, so they continued to exert pressure on those below. The 7 Orthodox churches thus began their reforms one after another. Below sequence 4, even for bishops at sequence 5, the salary is, strictly speaking, just so-so. While the pay is generous, it's not excessive. Red Gloves offers slightly better benefits, but it still can't compare to running a business. The new commercial aristocracy of Lowen, such as tycoons like Earl Hall, were able to rise to prominence by riding the waves of the times. This wasn't because the Lowen nobles of 1,000 years ago were short-sighted or incompetent, rather, it was because the church held immense power at that time, influencing everything from humanities and faith to violence and commerce. Since the Orthodox Church controlled the former, it was impossible for them not to engage in business and not to monopolize the market. The lands that traditional nobles acquired through military exploits and accumulation were granted, supported, and protected by the royal families of various countries. Otherwise, they would not have been able to keep their lands. In the past, nobles could only profit from land, rent, and positions because they had been emasculated. In the new era, habit becomes second nature. Traditional nobles, especially Grand Dukes and Marquises, are accustomed to the current model and wield more power. Their desire for change is not as strong as that of the lower and middle nobles and the new class. This is why the new party was able to rise in the business world. This part comes from Bishop Electra's description and part from Shah-Ur's understanding. The reason he can give Migos such a high annual salary is because of some investments he's made. Although the Evernight Church does not allow clergy to engage in business or politics, Migos is not subject to this restriction. She is not a member of the Evernight Church, so she can make her own business investments and open factories to make a profit. Although Shah-Ur cannot receive commercial compensation or other benefits that clergy are not entitled to, if his personal assistant, Ms. Migos, is kind-hearted, values his appearance and demeanor, is attracted by his charm, and willingly makes offerings and generous donations to him. As a knight bishop with sequence 5, he can still manage. So, Migos wasn't actually that disappointed. She liked Backland, and she liked its high society, social atmosphere, platform, and opportunities. If she married Shah-Ur, then according to principle, the spouses of high-ranking clergy members were also not allowed to engage in too much business. But if she weren't her partner, all these factories, all these shares, all this territory, it would all be hers, and she could still live in Shah-Ur's villa in the West End, still enjoy the care and love from the man she loved. So Migos was quite satisfied. She had no intention of getting married, she even hoped to build a strong friendship with Audrey and continue pursuing her passions as a successful person. The £4,000 was just a guaranteed minimum, she actually had much more to her name. For a legitimate Beander to follow this model, the key is to avoid ending up with nothing. Although, in theory, clergy and Beanders have absolute dominance over ordinary people, if someone uses this non-partner to dig a hole, even if they retaliate against the life assistant who betrayed them afterward, it will be to no avail. Once the money is gone, it's gone. Moreover, it will affect one's reputation and piety in the church, since such unspoken rules cannot be brought to the forefront. Melissa was being held and danced in Migos' arms. She had wanted to comfort him, but seeing that he didn't seem upset at all, she was a little confused. She could only sigh at Shah-Ur's charm and try to protect her purity amidst Migos' increasingly wicked advances. "Don't stand so close," Melissa roared inwardly. But Migos wouldn't listen. She herself was from Tingan City and really liked this cute little sister who also came from Tingan City. Moreover, Migos now feels that he has made something of himself, based on a compensatory psychology. She longed to, or was already showering Melissa with the love and care that comes from her sister. Melissa must savor all this kindness and warmth, otherwise how can her sister enjoy this happiness and genuine emotion? Similarly, the men present began looking for the first dance partner they wanted to invite, while Klein picked up another glass of champagne and leisurely surveyed the guests. He was mainly looking at his sister, he could never truly trust her, and seeing this beautiful scene gave Klein a strange feeling of heartache. He also needs to choose his dance partner, even though he doesn't know almost anyone here. Oh, Mrs. Mary is here too. Klein suddenly paused, glanced around, and spotted a familiar face. Mrs. Mary, a major shareholder of Koimi Company, worth tens of thousands of pounds, who had once commissioned Sherlock Moriarty to catch her husband cheating. She's a member of the Air Pollution Investigation Committee, and it's normal for her to be close to the members of Parliament who support this issue. We've decided on you. Klein bravely rushed forward. Beautiful lady, may I have this dance? Dwayne Dantes, his temples graying, bowed with perfect technique. It's my pleasure. Mrs. Mary glanced at him, he was her type. Greater than 428 changing dance partners. The country music of Central Lowen gently rises to the rhythm of the dance. Klein's reason for choosing Mrs. Mary was simple. She was at least an acquaintance, and he couldn't just stand there idly, he had to find a way to make things happen. In fact, the lady was a pretty good dancer, which allowed him to integrate into the circle. Shah and Hazel's dance proceeded without any major incidents. The Maherts have also planned out Hazel's future, to inherit Mrs. Liana's resources and become a lawyer, or even a top lawyer. While the immediate spouse of a clergy member cannot engage in business, they can serve as a lawyer. As for Councillor Matched's political resources, they will be merged with Councillor Maynard's, inherited by Councillor Maynard's eldest son. After the birth of Shah and Hazel's next generation, they will be groomed for clergy based on their interests. Lawyer, city councillor, and similar positions are all within the jurisdiction of these two organizations. Hazel herself wasn't interested in being a lawyer, especially after experiencing the extraordinary world. However, she was a confident and proud woman. Her dislike for this ordinary profession didn't mean she lacked confidence in herself, so she didn't argue with the Maherts. Perhaps in a young girl's eyes, being a lawyer who upholds justice by day and a hero who fights criminals by night is a cool, albeit somewhat childish, fantasy. After a simple dance, Shah released Hazel, and Migos next to her stopped at the same time. The two switched partners, very tacitly, without causing any ripples. Congratulations, Hazel. Migos smiled as he held Hazel's hand. HMPH. Although Hazel was very confident in her looks, she couldn't help but let out a soft snort when she looked at the beautiful blonde girl in front of her. It's understandable that she was unhappy. Migos was, to some extent, her rival in love, but at least she won. Moreover, her teacher had said that a successful woman should never lose her composure over such trivial matters. She only needs to firmly grasp her core interests, and she can flexibly manipulate the rest at any time. My parents like you very much too. After expressing her dissatisfaction, Hazel switched to a friendly relationship. Putting aside the issue of stealing a man, she still admired Migos. Beautiful people always leave a good impression. It is my honor, and I am very grateful to Mr. Mahert and Mrs. Liana for their kindness. Migos gave a faint smile. Her good relationship with Hazel and the Mahert family had not been in vain. I won't hold it against you for sleeping with me, since we're friends. Even though you awful guy already. Hazel was still a little angry when she thought about it. She was mainly angry with herself, because she had suffered at the hands of someone younger than her. The Maherts didn't care about, and even accepted, Migos for a simple reason. Migos' existence was stable and had certain value. She comes from a middle-class family in Tingan City, has a certain level of education, a clean background, and a career that she genuinely wants to pursue and has actively chosen. The Maherts genuinely felt that this was actually quite good. After Hazel became a lawyer, she could directly take care of and supervise the businesses managed by Migos. This structure was stable and had potential for growth, and Lowen's laws would protect his wife's legal rights. As for Migos' somewhat romantic nature, the Maherts didn't pay much attention to it. She was a clean, beautiful, and intelligent girl who wasn't unpleasant and got along well with Hazel. If this were Mrs. Sharon, or Holy Maiden of White, a socialite like Katerina, would be absolutely unacceptable to the Maherts. Migos watched Hazel's mixture of pride, anger, understanding, and displeasure. She really wanted to laugh, but she continued dancing while trying to soothe the future lady's emotions. Please don't say that. I was just doing some maid work. Migos doesn't mind making jokes in front of Hazel. Then you need to apologize to those hard-working maids. Hazel snorted, unmoved by Migos' tactics. I will, my lady, I will do as you say. Migos wrapped his arms around Hazel's waist and spoke gently. She loves her current life and environment, she is happy and radiates cheerfulness and kindness. This made Hazel a little embarrassed. After all, she was a simple girl and felt that she was making things too difficult for Migos. On the other side, Shah held Melissa's hand and moved slowly across the dance floor to the rhythm. It's clear that Melissa is very shy, especially after she changed her dance partner to Shah. If you don't want to dance later, you can rest on the side. If you want to dance, Migos or Hazel can accompany you. Sha'ur didn't neglect emotional support, he naturally helped Melissa relax through a combination of words and actions, allowing her to unwind amidst the music and dance. Thank you. Melissa blushed slightly and thanked Sha'ur in a low voice. She was indeed very embarrassed, but no girl doesn't yearn for banquets and dances. It's just that she had never dared to stand on the dance floor and move her feet to the music before. She had never learned how, and she also felt that she didn't belong there. Some of the simple dance steps were taught by Migos. When Migos first arrived in Tingen, he didn't fully understand Backlund's social style and had to learn and figure it out little by little on his own. Spending time with Migos was a great help to Melissa. This wasn't an important ball, but rather a private dinner hosted by the Mahert family. Hazel, a friend of Melissa's, was there to indulge in a small indulgence. Although Melissa was apprehensive, she was able to accept it. The most interesting thing is probably teaching you to dance. It's a pity that Migos made you no longer so naive. Sha'ur's words were somewhat regretful. Klein, who was observing from a distance, couldn't hear them very clearly, but he had a feeling that they weren't good words. It wasn't convenient to use a secret puppet to eavesdrop in this situation, and the lack of prior preparation made the great Mr. Fool feel deeply anxious. Klein once again felt that forming a friendship with Maynard Jr. in Tingen was a mistake. Wow. When Melissa heard Sha'ur's regretful words, her face flushed uncontrollably. She thought of how stiff and reserved she had been, the embarrassing things she had done, and how she had stepped on Migos' shoes many times. If it weren't for her fellow countrywoman, her confidant, and the privacy she needed, Melissa probably would have given up halfway through. Now that Sha'ur has brought this up herself, Melissa is finding it hard to contain herself. She worries that Migos might reveal some of her poor performance to Sha'ur. The regret in Sha'ur's words makes the girl feel both scared and relieved. The only thing she doesn't want is for Sha'ur to teach her to dance. On the other side, you are a very knowledgeable gentleman. May I ask your name? Mrs. Mary admired Klein's eloquence and insight, but she couldn't comprehend the pain in the man's heart. Dwayne Dantes. He practically spat out those words through gritted teeth. 429 Monday arrives. Such unpleasant things have become quite common, gradually becoming a normal part of life. Later, Klein also tried to explain some things to Melissa through dreams, which had some effect, but he couldn't get it right the first time. This was an explanation, but also a form of hypnosis. Klein didn't want his sister to misunderstand him in the future. Besides, the identity of Dwayne Dantes was still useful, so he could only try to contact Melissa privately using the identity of Sherlock. For example, he secretly distributed some of the money from the sale of shares to Melissa through various means. However, Don's identity might involve some sensitive issues, so he can't interfere with his sister's normal social life right now. He can only watch over her from the shadows as her protector, which is somewhat frustrating. Fortunately, Klein still trusted Maynard Jr. to some extent. Although he was a bit excessive, at least he wouldn't really hurt Melissa or take her to dirty places. After Sha'ur danced with Melissa, he let go of the somewhat shy girl and turned his attention to Klein. As a semi-host, he needed to take care of the newcomer so that she wouldn't be alone at the banquet. Mr. Dantes, the atmosphere at the ball is quite nice, isn't it? I think it's relatively easy, at least we can try these special apple pies. Sha'ur, carrying a plate, walked over to Klein. Yes, the music and atmosphere here are great. Klein smiled and glanced at Sha'ur's plate, which was filled with apple pie, lettuce, and cherry tomatoes. He couldn't understand why the young nobleman of Backlund here, who usually adored such fragrant steaks, red wine with foie gras, and those delicious-looking pastries, hadn't touched a single one of them and were eating lettuce here. I can't understand. Maynard, what are you talking about? A handsome man with brilliant blonde hair walked over with a glass of red wine and smiled at Sha'ur. This is Hibbert Hall, the eldest son of the Earl of Eastchester, and the chief secretary of the Air Pollution Investigation Committee. A second-generation family that is relatively, at least in terms of money and family background. Behind Hall family is actually Evernight Church, mainly referring to asset management. After all, churches cannot openly engage in business, but they cannot truly rely solely on donations from the majority of believers. Therefore, as long as it is a donation from nobles, and the nobles donate large sums of money to the church out of faith on some major holidays each year, especially on the day with the longest night of the year, which seems to be called the winter rite, also known as the birthday of the Evernight goddess, then everything is reasonable, compliant, and normal. This is Mr. Hibbert Hall, and this is Mr. Dwayne Dantes. Sha'ur gave the two a brief introduction. He doesn't view Hall family with any bias now, nor does he consider them to be anyone's people. They are simply their own people, doing their own thing in their own domain with the tacit approval of the environment, and then distributing profits to various forces that need them. It's that simple. Although it seems to be deeply tied to Evernight Church, it is not actually part of the church's organizational structure. Those at sequence 4 and above don't care, but those below sequence 4 will normally be treated well and given certain conveniences. Hello, sir, please allow me, as an ordinary person, to express my gratitude. The work of the Air Pollution Investigation Committee has given us a better living environment. Klein glanced at the newcomer and, true to his persona, showed the necessary respect to the genuine nobleman before him. After all, the Earl of Eastchester was a representative of the new party and had already reached the top within the official system of the Kingdom of Lowen. Haha, I only made some minor contributions. Hibbert Hall was clearly flattered. After all, the newcomer's expression and tone were so sincere, and this was his first official career. It's easy to appease a young master like this. Didn't Miss Audrey come? Shaw mentioned Audrey, saying she hadn't seen her for a few days and missed her terribly. Sigh. She's always busy with her own things and doesn't want me to bother her. And every time, she comes up with a perfectly good excuse, like pursuing art, needing focus and quiet to paint, and also having some matters to attend to on the family land. Hibbert Hall looked somewhat helpless. But it was also to explain things up for Audrey, since it would be somewhat impolite for a friend like Audrey not to attend such a semi-formal, private party. Hibbert felt that Audrey might actually have some feelings for Shaw, which was why she didn't want to attend the banquet where Shaw and Hazel were semi-officially announcing their relationship. This made him feel both helpless and relieved. Although she knew her younger sister would get married sooner or later, it would be nice if that day could be delayed. Audrey had just come of age and was still young. Aristocratic women had to consider many things when it came to marriage, and they could take their time to choose. The Hall family could afford to support her. Therefore, you, the eldest son of the Earl, can only pitifully travel back and forth between Backland and the family territory. Busy and hectic. I really hope you eat a few more of those interesting bento boxes sold on the steam train. Shaw made a joke. He found it rather interesting to watch these aristocratic scions, so wealthy they could squander their wealth for 500 years, still busy, struggling, going around in circles, and wasting their time within the rules of their own game. Haha, I don't think I'm that pathetic. My servants and cooks will arrange everything for me. Hilbert smiled as well. Klein observed that this was a gentleman who valued his social image highly. At least when he was around, the gentleman always displayed a demeanor that seemed to be deliberately cultivated. On Monday, Backland time, 3 p.m. Deep red light shone on both sides of the mottled long table, solidifying into blurry, different figures. Audrey was in good spirits as usual, because her brother Hibbert Hall telegraphed her that Mr. Sherlock's agent had agreed to sell 10% of Backland Bicycle Company for 12,000 gold coins, which she could accept. Moreover, she didn't need to rush back to Backland to sign the papers. Hilbert was a reliable person, and he helped his sister with most of the work. For example, with 2 lawyer witnesses present, Audrey signed a power of attorney. Now, all Audrey needs to do is wait until everything is completed before signing a confirmation letter to Hilbert. This was arranged by Klein after Hilbert brought it up at a party at Mahert's house. He was very satisfied with the deal, since he needed money and cashing out was the best course of action. Greater than 430 cat and anchor. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Good afternoon, Mr. Angel. With a smile, Audrey gracefully stood up and greeted the figure shrouded in gray mist at the head of the bronze table, as well as her companion on her right. Fool nodded slightly in response. Good afternoon, Miss Justice. It is a pleasure to meet you. Shaw replied politely, admitting that Audrey was indeed elegant, but this elegance did not stem from any aristocratic etiquette. Rather, it was a kind of composure that emanated from within after basic material and spiritual needs had been met. A vitality that does not numb oneself, does not worry about tomorrow, and always looks forward to the future. This was very attractive to Klein, who was lonely and helpless, with an uncertain future, and under considerable psychological pressure. In addition, the perfect image of a noblewoman constructed by her family background, appearance, and character made it impossible for him not to like her. But Klein's liking is also based on a kind of idle liking. He himself would not really get too close to Audrey Hall, or even Gehrman Sparrow, just to enjoy the comfort and ease brought by this equal relationship at a certain distance. Shaw is different, he can say what he likes directly, even if furs on the right is practically glaring out of his head. If Audrey were a rose, Klein would enjoy admiring her bloom and beauty, while Shaw would take a few steps closer to appreciate the rose's fragrance, or rather, its naturally released aroma. However, neither of them intended to pick the flower. At least for now, I have absolutely no such idea. Mr. Angel, I am equally delighted by this. Audrey was genuinely pleased by the angel's bluntness. After all, this wasn't a social ball in Backland, and she didn't think the angel needed to be so low-and-esquely tactful. The gray mist shrouding her face had already done the tact for the angel. Audrey herself also somewhat enjoys this straightforwardness, which is different from Intis's straightforwardness and enthusiasm. At least as a spectator, and as a woman with extensive social experience, Audrey could sense that the angel appreciated her charm. He might want to embrace her, but there was no obvious, urgent, demanding thought of taking off her clothes. This conclusion left Audrey unsure whether to laugh or be angry. She could guess that Mr. Angel preferred her, but if he had to choose one to sleep with, he would choose Ms. Magician, and had chosen Furs long ago. This even made Audrey doubt herself. Was she a problem in some way? This reassuring unease, or the unease that comes with unease. Audrey never showed it in the slightest. Mr. Fool, this time there are 3 pages of Roussel the Great's diary. It was still Ms. Hermit who provided journal support for the Tarot Club. Very good. Klein was not surprised. With a casual gesture, 3 diaries materialized in his hand. He had high expectations for the diaries provided by Bernadette, believing that the diaries carefully selected by Queen Mystic must be of great importance. And indeed, that's the case. Bernadette specially selected and teased Fool's diary, revealing the truth of the world little by little, just like the original timeline. Bernadette herself had been kept in the dark for so many years, so of course she couldn't let Fool know everything all at once. Her current mood was similar to teasing and playing with her own little nephew. At least in Huang Bei's eyes, Zhou Mingbrui is at most a little nephew who hasn't grown up yet. As for Uncle Zhou, he's almost 200 years old, already the Huang Bei of Sequence 2, and has never thought about this aspect. On the yellowish-brown parchment, lines of text that seem to still retain the owner's emotions are telling the story. September 11th. Since I became an angel, I have had the feeling that my personality is splitting. Uncontrollable indifference, bloodlust, cruelty and madness are like the products of normal metabolism in my body. This does not come from the outside world, nor is it the influence of gods, but from a deeper level, the genetic level. It may originate from the beyond characteristic itself, from the collective unconscious inherited by generations of humanity. Oh my God, I feel like a tabby cat now. I've found an obedient human and live a life where even pooping is done by servants, but I'm still not tamed by life. I retain my original, unique wildness, which gives me a strong desire to hunt and kill, to devour any creatures around me that can provide energy and nutrients and have Neander characteristics. This feeling is painful. I finally understand why my orange cat once abandoned me. As a natural predator, it is difficult to control its instinct to go into the wild, into the mountains and forests, and to hunt those small animals with delicious meat. The only way I can think of is to play a role, or even strengthen my identity as a human being, but the effect is only so-so. There is still a sense of being restricted in the White Maple Palace. Even though I am playing a role in digesting the magic potion, there is no improvement. No wonder Mr. Dorr said that reason is temporary, madness is eternal. We are practically fighting against the deepest commands of our genes, against the instinctive needs of life. September 28th. I haven't written in my diary for half a month. During this period, I can clearly feel that my emotions are becoming indifferent. I can clearly feel all of this. Matilda is my wife, but her weight in my heart is constantly being diluted. Even Bernadette can only make me feel a little bit of fatherly love. It suddenly occurred to me that in nature, mother animals will eat their seriously injured or disabled cubs. When I saw Bernadette, for a moment I thought of this case, and I thought it was not a good sign, even if it was a reasonable way to recycle resources and replenish energy. I feel like I'm going crazy. Everything I've built in the past, based on human cognition, seems to be liberating and reshaping, and I'm feeling it all, but I'm powerless to do anything about it. When I really wanted to do something, I seemed to hear countless praises from my subjects, from those who benefited from my reforms, from the believers who saw me as Thiessen of Steam. They were praising and singing my praises. Although I could also hear the curses and swears of the old aristocracy, it was something that gave me a strong sense of existence. Their voices were like the anchor of a ship, helping me to orient myself. Those concepts of good and evil, right and wrong, that are disappearing and fading from the human race, the sedimentation of generations in the ocean of collective unconsciousness, hold me back and fill my spirit. I am not a beast after all. If I see a woman I like, I can't rush up and take her in the street. That would be ungentlemanly. At least in a relatively private room. Jacob said this is called anchoring to humanity, or social reconstruction, or personality reintegration. 431 artificial anchors. What is considered mysterious is no longer so mysterious once Paragon analyzes it. The so-called anchor is somewhat similar to the morality, etiquette, and culture that have been deposited in the collective unconscious of humankind. This kind of social concept, value system, unspoken rules, and universally accepted and recognized sense of right and wrong, moral code, which are based on the collective unconscious of mankind, are capable of resisting that desire and that heartfelt cry. In essence, it can be considered as constructing a sense of racial identity. Humanity is no longer a fixed essence, but has become an operating system or interactive system that can be uninstalled and installed. The hardware is the body, the person remains unchanged, but the software that runs determines their behavior patterns. The process of losing humanity is like that of a wild animal, actively or passively stripping oneself from social norms, unloading the operating system of being human. Once the anchor refills and reloads these perceptions, internalizing the human interaction system, such as morality, etiquette, and law, self-awareness and behavioral norms are immediately restored. This is the method Hermit deconstructed, using a more scientific, or at least somewhat logical, approach to define somewhat ethereal beliefs and anchors. Once he could easily realize this, the existence of faith became somewhat dispensable for Hermit. Why can Aemon use the Aemon army as an anchor? Because Aemon uses Aemons, these clones, to emphasize to himself that he is Aemon. Therefore, he was able to use himself as an anchor, which can be considered a divine being born of nature and nurtured by the earth, a God-child without race, who adapted to himself and forged a path. But Hermit, he couldn't do that. Aemon, however, he was already able to create his own anchors. An anchor is simply an information-based operating system used for interaction. Hermit was even able to store these operating systems on different USB drives. When humanity was lost, he could reclaim one USB drive and restart the system. If the virus on your computer isn't that powerful, if it's so powerful that even a newly reinstalled system crashes quickly, then you can only rush to update and upgrade your firewall. If that's not possible, then you'll have to physically destroy the hardware, specifically the computer itself. The save data in Snake of Fate is not the same as the save data in Hermit. The former saves the hardware state, and the rewind is based on the internal operating system, returning to the point before the error instruction in the system blue screen. The latter saves a real interactive system that can reinstall the system, which is the most suitable anchor for itself. These are things Klein was unaware of. He was shocked by the contents of the Rosel's diary. Damn it, Thief Pathway might even be able to steal the anchor, otherwise how would this guy know so much about this ability? Klein could see that Rosel's strokes were a bit messy, as if she wanted to write something but didn't know how to express it. Just looking at the description, Klein felt a deep sense of dread. What if Jacob really did steal the Emperor's anchor when the Emperor was at his worst? After going mad, Rosel, who has lost her humanity, can only be called a monster, right? As for the Emperor himself, he was already dead. These thieves are truly frightening. Rosel seemed to have a feeling that she wasn't afraid of being robbed, but rather afraid of being targeted by thieves. Now I think I understand a little better why we establish churches, why we spread faith, and why we write chapters for the saints of our own power and leave legends for the corresponding angels. This is, in a way, to prevent marauder, in some similar cases. Only when the number of anchors is large enough, and when faith is as vast as mountains and seas, intimately connected with the workings of this world and human society, will the anchors not suffer structural collapse. This will also greatly increase the difficulty for thieves like Jacob to steal the sky and change the sun. But why do the 7 great gods not have human forms, but are merely symbols? I don't understand. Perhaps we can only ask Mr. Dorr. After all, he knows a lot and is much more honest than Jacob. He can gloss over things he doesn't know or doesn't want to say, unlike Jacob, whose words are a mix of truth and falsehood. You have no idea which are true and which are false. He actually said that the reason for using symbolic representations instead of human figures was that there were too many statues of the gods built in various churches at the time, which caused a series of minor problems. The gods found it troublesome, the churches found it troublesome to maintain and care for them, and they couldn't get angry, so they replaced them all. How ridiculous. There must be some deeper meaning here. Jacob must be fooling me. I don't believe that the true God would make such a major decision over such a trivial matter. Do you think these statues would be bothered by the pigeons in the square? These statues are all powerful. PFF'd. Klein almost burst out laughing when she saw Rosel's words. Because he had actually seen the statues of the true gods, he simply couldn't connect them with the gods, Buddhas, and the Statue of Liberty that he had previously known. Moreover, regarding divine power, Klein recalled the scene when he saw those statues of the true gods, and it seemed that not all statues could be consecrated. However, Rosel is right. The real reason could not have been so hasty. There must be some important reasons that we do not know about. Klein patiently continued reading the diary. On September 29, in order to regain more humanity, I started to reread yesterday's diary, including previous ones, from the beginning to the present. I thought of the rituals corresponding to Sequence 4, Sequence 3, and Sequence 2 respectively. These rituals all seemed to be burning something to temporarily bring warmth and guidance. As I thought about Jacob's words, the pity and self-mockery I felt gradually disappeared. Is the path to Sequence hopeless? And this is the only path for humanity to obtain extraordinary power. This seems to be a fundamental theorem of the universe. Yes, it's the same in every universe. Entropy increases and entropy decreases. I should have known this long ago, but I was not as quick as Jacob. Do we strive to save ourselves only to destroy ourselves more completely and thoroughly? Or, as Jacob says, is it a romance and a miracle of life? The diary is still going on. On December 25, another blood moon, I contacted Mr. Dorr again. This time, I did the same as before, asking him questions and delaying his request. He knew it, but he didn't seem to care. Judging from his appearance, he didn't seem like a prisoner. He wasn't in a hurry or anxious to return to reality. But I still want to win his favor. At least Mr. Dorr doesn't like Jacob. When Jacob is mentioned, Mr. Dorr never minds and tells me more about him. Greater than 432 The Moon Messenger. I asked Mr. Dorr about the concept of the King of Angels, or rather, the hierarchy, and Mr. Dorr told me that it either contained the uniqueness or that he had consumed more than one dose of the Sequence 1 potion. Russell certainly didn't understand the meaning of containment, but Mr. Dorr's explanation wasn't clear either. He simply said that if uniqueness couldn't be contained, then before the initiation ceremony, uniqueness would be a hindrance rather than a help to the angels of Sequence 1. Mr. Dorr then gave the example of Adam and Ammon, two lucky guys born with uniqueness, but when I asked about the ancestor of the Jacob family, he seemed to fall into a kind of silence. I don't know why Mr. Dorr, who usually speaks calmly about God, fell silent when Jacob was mentioned. Anyone who didn't know better would think that Jacob had stolen something from him. However, Mr. Dorr did answer my question. He asked me a question that Mr. Hermes had also asked. Among the gods of today, if one were to be chosen to develop in the field of omniscience, which one would be the most likely and promising? Of course it's the true creator, the ability to herd sheep, which inspires both fear and dread. However, Mr. Dorr's answer was different. He told me that omniscience also means omnipotence. Does this mean God of knowledge and wisdom? Knowledge is power. Mr. Dorr didn't elaborate further. He simply told me that Marauder's strength lay not in his ability to steal, but in his clear understanding of what he was going to steal and his ability to make perfect use of it afterward. I admit, these words stirred up some unpleasant memories for me. I tried to ask Mr. Dorr in a light-hearted tone, what should you do if someone's fate is tampered with? Can Marauder permanently take over that person's fate? Mr. Dorr remained silent for a moment, and his reply was very simple. It was best to pray that Marauder still had some conscience. Damn it, if conscience were useful, what would be the point of faith? Mr. Dorr probably guessed something. He went on to tell me that if fate falls into the hands of thieves who are so familiar with fate, it will be a complete disaster. Not only will your identity be replaced, but everything you have accumulated may become the other party's fodder for takeover. You will also have to worry all the time that the other party will return the fate you have ruined. What's the difference between this and stealing your phone, identity information, phone number, or bank card? Your clean money in your account becomes black, and you have to worry even more about the other party laundering money and getting implicated, having your account frozen, going to jail, eating big bowls of wide noodles, and operating a sewing machine. Klein felt a little uncomfortable when he saw this. He seemed to have guessed why the Emperor's mental state deteriorated so quickly after he ascended to the angelic realm. Besides the unique nature of the Sequence 2 stage itself, another possible reason was that the Emperor's destiny was incomplete. Trojan horse of destiny. Klein's first thought was about his own fate, but then he realized that even Snake of Fate and Orange Light hadn't noticed anything wrong with his fate, so there probably wasn't. Otherwise, according to Mr. Ojik's advice to him in Tingen during the 008 incident, a high sequence number should be able to see the inconsistency in the fate of a low sequence number. Speaking of which, it's been a while since I've been in touch with Mr. Ojik. I hope Mr. Ojik is doing well. You can ask your questions now. Klein glanced at the last line, which contained some information about the original island, and then spoke to Ms. Hermit. Mr. Fool, may I ask if Emperor Russell ever joined a very secretive, very ancient organization? Hermit, Katlia asked directly. Do you want to order Twilight Hermit? Justice, Audrey thought immediately. After all, Mr. Fool had given a hint before. Yes. Klein nodded. This problem was simple, this level was cleared. You may begin to communicate freely. As Klein spoke, Derek was the first to reply, I have become a notary. You don't need to say that. Alger was still outdone by Derek's adorable cluelessness. Mr. Angel, we are almost at the former city of Giant King. Derek looked at Shah and said, my personal advice is that you don't need to rush. Now is not a good time to integrate into the new era. Shah could guess how fast Forsaken Land of the Gods would explore after Sun appeared, but he still wanted to slow down the City of Silver's exploration, since the outside world wasn't really that exciting. Okay, thank you, Mr. Angel. Although Derek didn't fully understand, he still expressed his gratitude. Now that the City of Silver has had the opportunity to purify the land, they are not in a hurry to relocate. After all, rebuilding their long-standing home excites and ignites the passion of these Beyonders. Emlyn felt that Sun shouldn't be the only one to display Moon, so he and Fool together conjured up the Moon doll and inquired about the origin of the item. Of course, it's on Moon. I've heard that queens or princes who want to advance to sequence 1 use similar items to help them complete the Beyonder ritual. Quote, if you possess a puppet that has accumulated the power of the moon for hundreds of years, you will only harm others and yourself. However, if you use them as an incarnation, while you are in a deep slumber, you may possess angelic power, which is, after all, the power of the primordial moon. Shah explained to Emlyn. His intention was to offer advice, but Emlyn's eyes lit up in surprise. You can become a prince through this kind of puppet. Emlyn didn't believe it at all, but he was still intrigued. Yes, the lower the sequence, the smaller the effect. You will inherit Moon. Puppet's status is a dependent of the primordial moon. If you don't want it, you can consider selling it to me. Shah really wanted it. He would take the divine power inside, process it, and give it to Hazel. It would become a perfect beauty artifact, and through stealing heavenly secrets and specific ritual magic, she could use this mystical item. How much are you willing to pay for it? Emlyn plans to ask about the price first. You give it to me, I'll help you with the sequence 4 promotion ceremony. Shah leaned back in his chair, already starting to make empty promises. Make a deal. Emlyn almost immediately agreed before she even started thinking about it. What is the promotion ceremony for the Count of Sanguine? He's not even a vampire viscount yet. Ahem, I haven't asked my elders about the ceremony for being promoted to Earl. I thought I could ask about it after I became a viscount. Emlyn didn't say he wasn't qualified to know yet, he coughed lightly to indicate that he hadn't had a chance to ask. Then you won't have to ask. Shah smiled understandingly, the promotion ceremony is very simple, it truly earns the approval of Moon. Greater than 433 Abraham's children. The ritual for Sanguine to ascend to demigod status was very simple, truly gaining the approval of Moon. This surprised everyone in the Tarot Club, as the ritual seemed somewhat abstract. However, they quickly came up with various interpretations. The only ones who could represent the moon were the long-deceased Sanguine progenitor Lilith, the Evernight goddess known as the Crimson Mother, and, more directly, the primordial moon. But none of these 3 issues are easy to resolve. In what ways can angels help? Moreover, isn't this Beyonder ritual, which grants ascension to demigod status, a bit too harsh? Even Emlyn himself felt it was harsh, wondering how those sanguine demigods had been promoted before. But then he thought, this doesn't make sense. As the sanguine savior chosen by the progenitor, he had already gained Moon's approval, so why did he need to pay with a moon paper doll? Mr. Angel, is it possible that I have already gained Moon's approval? Emlyn slightly raised her chin, clearly still very confident, with a hint of pride in showing off. Did you get it? I can't tell. Shah shook his head, he didn't want to dampen the spirits of the adorable sanguine boy. But given Emlyn's current state, he probably hasn't even obtained Lilith's ring, the level 1 sealed artifact that was connected to Lilith in the original timeline. He's just a self-proclaimed savior, and he doesn't even know where to find the Beyonder characteristic that was upgraded to sequence 4, let alone gain Moon's approval. Ahem, I know you may not believe it, but I am actually the savior of Sanguine as prophesied by the progenitor. Originally, I didn't intend to tell you this secret, but since Mr. Angel also comes from an angel family, knows about the legends of the apocalypse, and has some connection with our Sanguine, I'm revealing it to you. Emlyn was somewhat resentful and selectively revealed some secrets. Oh. Shah nodded slightly and didn't continue speaking, which was taken as a sign of belief. The other members of the Tarot Club found it interesting. Audrey, as the spectator, could tell that Moon didn't mean to lie, but Mr. Angel's reaction of not arguing, not refuting, and not agreeing, seemed a bit off. Alger and Katlia were completely incredulous. What a joke. The Sanguine, a supernatural race with angels, must have gone mad to make Mr. Moon their savior. Sha'ur looked at Furs, who was watching the show with great interest, and said, "I'll come find you later." "Really? Magician?" Furs was initially delighted, but then his face flushed slightly as he considered the occasion. But she quickly realized that Angel knew she had something to discuss with him. She had originally planned to wait until everyone had finished talking before speaking. "I also happen to need to talk to you about something." Furs quickly chimed in, explaining that her situation was simple. Her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham, was planning to promote everyone to Sequence 4. "We hope Sha'ur can come and help look after Secret Sorcerer." This can be seen as the Abraham family placing their trust in Sha'ur. Dorian intends to use his own life to test Sha'ur one last time. If Sha'ur is indeed willing to help the Abraham family, then that's good, and the Abraham family will have to surrender afterwards. "Let's talk about it when we meet later." Sha'ur nodded, and the two reached an agreement. Only Emlyn remained, questioning the meaning of life, because Sha'ur seemed to believe it but also seemed not to. The real world. Sha'ur met Dorian and Furs in an abandoned warehouse in East Borough. But this is clearly not a good place to hold a promotion ceremony and conversation. It's already Sequence 5 Traveler. Dorian activated the teleportation, and Sha'ur and the others arrived at a wilderness. "If I am promoted, the entire Abraham family will remember your kindness." Dorian was clearly somewhat excited, but he still maintained the etiquette that the Angel family had long since abandoned. "Of course, you can try it boldly. I can at least guarantee that you will survive in the end." Sha'ur nodded. Furs was a little nervous, but considering Sha'ur's strength, he was able to remain calm. The Ascension ritual for Secret Sorcerer is relatively simple, requiring only that the Ascendant seal a demigod-level creature with clear hostility. It is best not to use external force in this process, as it is said to be a special requirement of the ritual, which requires the demigod-level being to transfer the subject's emotions, such as hatred, onto himself. "I'm starting." Dorian nodded. His plan was to release a demigod-level creature that had gone completely mad and was acting solely on instinct from the devil painting, thus saving him the trouble of finding a real demigod. Using the devil painting, he summoned a terrifying demigod-level creature, and then, without wasting much time, under Furs's worried gaze, he produced a scepter, the Abraham family's zero-level sealed artifact, the Star Staff. This demigod-level creature didn't last long before it was resealed, leaving Furs completely stunned. Dorian seemed to know all of the monster's abilities. He anticipated all of the monster's attacks as it prepared to launch one, and sealed the monster away with the help of the devil painting. Then, he took a sip of the potion and looked at Sha'ur with an expression of waiting for judgment or resignation to fate. "Your Excellency, I wish to personally uncover the truth behind the Abraham family's bloodline curse. If I perish, I hope you can help me return this sealed artifact to the Abraham family." As Dorian spoke, with a death wish, he deliberately crushed the protective talisman given to him by Sha'ur to shield him from the full moon curse. He heard terrifying whispering sounds exploding in his ears. The whispering sounds brought by the super spiritual power almost made him lose control on the spot. But when the zero-level sealed artifact in his hand, the Star Staff, lit up, Dorian, who was prepared, barely managed to simulate abilities like mind healing and mental barriers through his backup plan. Then, following the connection brought by the sealed artifact, as well as the special circumstances during his advancement and the guidance of his own bloodline, he saw a world located in endless darkness and enveloped by lightning. Is this the ancient Hermes language? At this moment, Dorian could even hear some emotional fluctuations in the language, which seemed to be painful, sad, and full of crazy roars. This voice that directly impacted his soul almost shattered his brain, but nothing happened. An invisible doorway stood in the middle, seemingly separating life and death. "Are you a descendant of the Abraham family?" The voice was calm, yet tinged with nostalgia and gonkai. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.